Hi, Shanthi. Thanks for joining me, friend.
Hi, Tasshin.
So I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. As you know, I have been very interested in you and in your life and your thoughts and also your writing, which I have had the pleasure of reading over the last few months as you finally shared it with the world. Uh, and just have been so impressed with what I've seen in your writing and your thoughts. And, I'd sort of had glimpses of it before from our conversations, but I wanted to have you on to dive in deeply to understanding your thinking and your writing because it's kind of both very familiar to me in that it's connected to spirituality and the Dharma, but it's also very foreign. And I want to make sure I understand it as well as I can. And I'm also happy and excited to share it with the world. I think it's important thinking. So that's why we're having this conversation, as far as I'm concerned. Um, so I would love to start by asking you the question I ask everyone, which is about their life and where they're coming from, because this really helps me understand who someone is and where they're coming from and to frame specific questions about their thinking or their life in terms of the larger picture. And so I'd love to hear from you anything you'd like to share about your life so far and who you are and where you're coming from. And feel free to answer in any way or at any length that you like.
Hmm. You said you like it when people take a long time to answer this, right?
Well, I'm very fond of that, but it's what I really care about is that to me, there's an art to telling a story, and telling your life story is telling a story. And so sometimes people give almost like they go into like Wikipedia page mode, you know. It's like
Yeah.
if they're sufficiently famous, I could read the Wikipedia page about them, but I want to hear from them what the story is. And so
Yeah.
that would be the invitation is to tell it as a story, and whatever length is fine.
Yeah. Mm. I feel like I have to tell a story of like where my attention is and where it's been. Um, when I was born in Manhattan, to my parents, Yacinthi and Glenn, um, who are very kind people who really cared a lot about raising children well. And I lived in a really busy part of the city downtown and had like a little like tiny space and like lots of trucks and traffic and cars and whatnot, and was right in the heart of the city where everything happened. So like very aware of like lots and lots of people living lots and lots of very different lives, like all around me from a very early point. And was very precocious as a kid, very, very precocious child to the point of really freaking people out. People were really freaked out by the whole thing. And also kind of obsessively kind, like very obsessively righteous, and cared a lot about doing the being nice to people. Um, Always very drawn to plants and infatuated with plants in the plant world, from kind of the beginning, and also to music and singing. And and lots of imaginary stuff as kids do. And that was kind of my little life. I would be looking at plants, singing, trying really hard to be nice to everybody, and freaking people out in a major way. um, and hanging out with plants and singing, which is a good way to be a good way to begin a life. Mm. Then my family moved to Brooklyn when I was like 5, and I had a sister who was a baby at the time, and I had much more space in Brooklyn than I did in the city. Could go to the park, hang out in the trees, um, hang out with my sister, and spend a lot of time just doing that, just like and read. And I also learned to read. And then I was reading, that updated my life. Then I did some other things. I was doing all the same stuff as before, but then I was also reading and going to the park. So now I was reading and going to the park and singing and freaking people out and trying really hard to be nice to everyone. And I was reading so much. I would wake up before anyone else in my household so that I could get like 2 or 3 hours of uninterrupted reading time in. And then I would read like all day. Um, yeah. And I was like a very strange, again, very odd child. Um, I don't know if I want to get into that. But just like, yeah, completely odd. And nothing bad ever came of it for me because I was extremely conscientious. So people were kind of like, I don't want to, whatever's going on over there is super fucking weird, but I kind of don't want to complain about it because it is delivering good outcomes for me, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so people just kind of left alone, which is cool. Which is good. Um, really, really loved like immersive fantasy world series when I was little. I read a lot of like love the Warrior Cat books. Super into those. Really loved Harry Potter. Really loved the Guardians of Gahul. Really loved Lord of the Rings. Um, really loved like Ender's Game, Artemis Fowl, and anything that had to do with like yeah, really well built worlds. People were exploring. Just like yeah, spent a ton of time there. Attention on it. And also was very like anxious and was like constantly worried about like people having a bad time, like being unkind to each other or like fucking things up. Um Also had like a early fascination with just like resource resource management. Loved that stuff. Loved like organizing things or putting things in different containers in good ways. Love to do like rezoning. I would like take maps and then I would be like, what if we like I don't know. That was like my hobby. I would be like, what if we rezoned and more people could go here and they would have transit access. That was a one of my things. Got really into like agriculture, loved to read about early civilizations, especially Native Americans, and especially was fascinated with their agriculture and resource management practices. And it was bad. Every time like people would want to play, you know, when you're a kid, people want to play games. And I'd be like, let's play resource management simulator. And I would be like, okay, so we have all of the like imagine like I would take out like grains of rice or beans or whatever. I'd be like, imagine we have this many. How can we survive the winter? And I'd be like, and people were always like, what? So I would usually do something else or I'd play Resource Management Simulator alone. That one's a fun one because you can just do it in your head. Um, yeah, so these were new things entering my consciousness. Um, I had a couple beloved friends who were both like super high achieving girls of immigrant families who loved to read, and our parents all like encouraged us to hang out with each other because we were all kind of awkward and because we would all be like good influences on each other academically. Noha Noha Khalil and Hatanro, and we all were into the same books at the same times and would like play those games together and stuff. Um, but I also was friends with lots of boys. I was friends with like the nerd cluster of boys who would play like fucking StarCraft and like yeah, a lot of StarCraft actually. That was kind of it. And we're into like robots and stuff. And I was also friends with lots of them. So I was a little bit like in two worlds. But really, really loved those early friendships and I'm very grateful to them. Um, yeah, then stuff you get older, you have to go to like more school, there's more academic pressure, even though you're like it's New York City, so like these things start mattering early. Um, went to middle school, sang in a choir, which is really special. I was probably singing like 3 hours a day on average in choir, and then I'd come home and sing more, which felt really good. But it was a ridiculous choir. It was like a show choir, so most of what we would sing was like four-part arrangements of pop songs. So you would have like 112-year-olds singing like a four-part melodic arrangement of Thriller. It's like that literally happened. Yeah. So that was what I was spending my time doing, but I was still like ecstatic. I was like, this is the best. Singing is awesome, even though we were singing the silliest things in the world. I had a really intense, wonderful friendship with my next door neighbor, who I was also in love with, which was marked my, I think, my first like major like existential tear yearning, romantic yearning, which drove me insane for like 2.5 years. Um, lots of drama there, but also lots of fun. And I'm really grateful to her. Um, mm, I was still very obsessed with ethics and like morality and stuff. I like refused to say a swear word, I think, ever until I was like 14. It was like a major like point of discipline. I was just like, no, I will not do it. What if there was a child? I don't know. I don't know what justification I had for it. I think it just was like a thing. And like at that point, when did I become? By the time I was by 12 at the latest, I was a staunch believer in like physical determinism. I had just through my contemplation arrived at arrived at that conclusion. I was sad at the fact that there was no religion in my life. Like I'd been to church a couple times and had like felt like spiritual experiences, but also was very much like politically aware and was like, oh God, people are dumb. Um, I had been to Buddhist temple a few times growing up, but it was like the Sinhalese like ethnic Buddhist temple and everything was in Sinhalese. And also I like asked questions of the priests and they were just kind of got mad at me and like wouldn't answer. And I now know that like in the Buddhist canon there are answers to these questions. Like I asked them, I was like, was the Buddha the only human being to ever become enlightened? And they were all don't ask that. And I was like, that's not even like a that bad of a question. I was like, that one total now I know that totally has an answer. And yeah, because I was pretty little. I was coming out of the gate with those. And I was like, how is it possible that this is the only person to ever do it? Because I was like, that either means that it's really hard and it's like a convergent process. And then I was like, how do you know that it isn't just a thing that could only ever happen to this? If it only ever happened to this one guy, how do we know that this isn't a thing that can only ever happen to this one guy? Maybe he was just like built special. And and but then they were like, no, other people have done. Like, they were like, Anyway, I was very frustrated by that encounter and kind of gave up on Buddhism. Pretty dramatically. I think I was in like tears and like rage at the fact that I was like, oh, it's people who are priests do not take their duty seriously. I was like, they could have at least given me something to read if they were, if they didn't want to talk. I understand if they're busy, but they like, what else is the point? Um, yeah. So I went on my like little like existential wanderings. Was pretty excited about science and math. Um, didn't really feel like that atheistic because I still have like a very strong sense of like the divine in nature and like in other people and in like relationships and play and music and stuff. So I couldn't go all the way there. I also when I was a kid, I like really believed in fairies. I like really wanted to believe in like all of that kind of thing. And it was like really tragic to me to be like, oh fuck. But I had somewhere in my heart, I think I still like really lived in an enchanted world and wanted to live in an enchanted world. But also I was like trying to actually make sense of things because I sense that there are like implications to this kind of thing. And it's good to be, if you want to live like a spiritual life or like a godly life, it's important to have true ideas about that sort of thing. Otherwise, you can only ever like think about it and believe, but you can't actually act from it. Um, so yeah, I was in search of truth. Got a little bit into game theory stuff at around the same time. Was pretty excited, just like little things, and would try to like make my friends like play games and things with me that were in that tradition, just because I was curious about human behavior and like what people would do, and I wanted to like I wanted to like spread the understanding of those ways of being and practices and stuff, but like with little success. People were thinking about other stuff. I didn't really want to push it. Um, yeah. when I went to a really good high school called Bard High School Early College Queens, which was kind of an experimental high school funded in part by Bard College. Shout out Bard College. Um, at Bard High School Early College Queens, you do high school in 2 years, like super fast, and then the next 2 years you take college courses that are offered in the building. And every teacher in the school is basically a professor. So like the same person who's teaching algebra one is also teaching linear algebra. And the same person who's teaching like English grammar basics is also teaching like Arabic poetry or like crazy like analytic philosophy shit like later, which is pretty fun because you're learning among people who really, really care about their subject areas. Um, yeah, I went to high school when I was like 14. I was super kind of depressed and neurotic at that point. I had pretty intense OCD my entire childhood. Um, which somehow was fine. I don't know. It was bad. I had like gut problems and like lots of like stomach aches and things as a child and was like super sensitive and would like cry at the drop of a hat and very intense OCD about like I mostly just I guess that's what the rituals are for. I would just do the rituals and be fine. um and I would just I had certain limits on things I could do and those would also mostly be fine because they were so weird that it like actually didn't impose any problems in my life. Like I couldn't wear denim probably until I was like 12 years old. I just like couldn't put it on my body. I don't know. But like that's one of those things where it's like kind of silly, but also it won't really fuck up your life that badly if you just like can't it's like it's kind of just like, oh well. I guess I won't. um but muscled through it later, figured it out. Yeah, but it was kind of coming to a head when I was like 14. I had my parents had issues. Um my like earlier friendships that were kind of sustaining in this like very easy way because it was this large group were kind of not there anymore because everybody split up to go to different high schools. Um, and yeah, different parent stuff was going on. Quite bad parent. I don't want to understate it, but I also don't want to go into specifics. Things were quite bad, in many different ways. Things were quite bad, and I I was very depressed, and I was put on medication, which definitely was a bad idea. Um, I still had like a nice time in school. I made a couple friends. Um, got into a pattern of hanging out with them. Was on just like typical high achiever, I should get good grades route. I was also like very obsessed and like psychologically merged with my mom this whole time. Um, every single thing I ever did was very oriented towards making her happy or at least not upsetting her. And I would not do anything ever if it had a chance of upsetting her. I would just not do it. Like it would have to be a thing that I was like absolutely guaranteed sure that she would never find out about, or I would just be like, nope, it would be like something being upsetting to her was just like super clear boundary in my behavior. Maybe the only one. It was like, and I was like really intense. Like if I wanted to wear something and then she like made it clear, just like in passing, she'd be like, oh, like I don't really, it doesn't look that great to me. It would just be like poisoned in my field of vision, and then I would just be like, well, it's ugly. And even if I personally liked it, I would just be like, now I know. I'd be like, oh, it's just, and I wouldn't be mad about it or anything. I'd just be like, oh, I can just never wear this ever. The end. Because I'm just gonna be aware of its like ugliness to like the one true paragon of aesthetic truth is my mother for all eternity. So yeah, I was still very merged with that kind of thing at that time, but also wanted to do stuff with my life that I knew would be less approved of, kind of. Um, really loved school, but was actually having to try to like keep up for the first time ever. And sophomore year was fine. Started going off the rails a little more. Junior year, I like went crazy for a long period of time. But also, I'll say in sophomore year, I got to learn all about game theory, which was really great. Major highlight. I had a history teacher named Cohen who taught like world history, and he started it off. with a super deep dive into game theory because he was like, in order to understand anything that happens ever, like you need to understand this. And then we started and we like went really deep into it, not just talking about like games in like the mathematical sense, but going into like case histories of how people like play these games differently across cultures and like why there would be like cultural differences in the strategies people choose and like blah blah blah. So not just thinking about optimization, but thinking about the ways that people are swayed to go to like non-optimal point play games in like non-optimal ways because of cultural backgrounds or whatever, and how like games can be nested in games, like blah blah blah. And I was like, thank you for making things make sense. And it was so big and so beautiful. And then we went we studied all history starting with like apes to like modernity, and it was awesome. And I also read a lot on my own at the time and was just like reading, reading, reading. And this cured some high amount of my social dysfunction. So I was always extremely socially anxious, um, but also did fine socially because I would just be extremely kind and like generous and like kind of a pushover. And it was always totally fine. But this, I just, everything, things started to just make a lot more sense about like why people would do things. And I was just like, ah, and it made things much less overwhelming to me because I actually had a sort of semi-coherent frame to see things through. I didn't start like being able to play quote unquote games that people were playing, but I was like aware that people were playing games that like had different solutions and outcomes that were like cooperative or competitive or both. The people were trying to like coordinate towards certain outcomes, and then I was like, ah, okay, now I kind of can use that. So that helped a lot. But then I went crazy. Boo. Right as I was like coming out of, right as I was like kind of starting to understand some things socially, and I was like kind of jamming on that and being able to like come into the social world, it was just, it was bad. Yeah, I had like first ever manic episode, semi drug induced, but not really because of the timing. I would say like the drugs probably like loosened something, and then like manic episode happened. Didn't know what it was. Was like very ecstatic. My sensory clarity went through the roof. Like I could like literally see levels of detail I previously couldn't see, like visually. Felt very in touch with the universe and God. Um, Super ecstatic, like more energy than I've ever had, felt really creative, felt like pretty certain that like spirituality was important and like kind of a non-negotiable part of life for the first time because I'd always kind of felt like somewhat indulgent or self-indulgent or like worried that I was investing resources in something fantastical when I would think about that kind of thing. And I was kind of like, oh shit, this is kind of the most important thing in the world. And luckily I was kind of already like EA pilled at that point in life where I'd just been like really focused on like how can I reduce suffering and like uplift the most people possible, while also just not upsetting my mother and making like decent living standards for myself had kind of been my path already. So it didn't really rock my shit too much to find out that something adjacent was what I should be doing. But it was crazy to be like, oh shit, like this thing I've been trying to do my whole life is not actually optional. And like other people not doing it, it's not really like to each their own. It's like other people are kind of like fucked if they're not in touch with this at all. Like, you don't have to be hardcore about it. But this whole time I'd kind of been like, oh, well, in life, there are some people who like choose conscientious paths because of their culture or whatever. And there's some people who don't. And that's life. And it's all equally valid. And then I like I had this experience and I was like, oh shit, not really. But I didn't really know what to do about it. And then I also just became very fascinated by like the phenomenology of the experience itself. And I was like, well, what the fuck is happening? And got really into that. So kind of like using the new sensory clarity and like energetic mind to try to process what was happening, which was kind of a bad move. And like you're not, I think generally you should let mystical experiences stand. But I was very like I was very confused and I was very lonely in the experience, and I wanted to, I think, be less lonely in it. And I also wanted to understand if the implications were true or not. So I wanted to really break it down, be like, what the fuck is happening? This is a valid source of information. I'm having like crazy delusions, and I need to like believe the opposite of everything that's going on. Like, what's happening? So got caught up in that for a while. Very lonely in it. Couldn't talk to anybody about it. Knew they think I was crazy. Um, and then it just made me more crazy, honestly. Um, yeah. Then I got very depressed because I think I just kind of ran out of steam, and also some of the implications started to settle more, like the how connected we are. And I had previously had like bouts of like tearfulness and like rage over just like this state existentially of the world, and would like cry about it a lot and stuff. And but I had mostly gotten over it as a because as a teenager, because I'd just been like, man, I'll just like get the best job I can to like work in service of humanity, and like what else can anybody do? And also this is kind of the state of the world, so be it. And this time I just got like way more opened up to it, and I was like, oh my god, things are actually so fucked. People are so cut off from each other. People are so depressed. People are so confused. People are so unkind. Factory farming is so bad. Like global warming is so bad. It's actually so bad. Like fuck. And not only is it really bad, it's like symptomatic of something like really spiritually dangerous and like wrong. It's not like, oh, Western culture dehumanized. It was like actually where this is like profound injury and problem that has led to all this stuff. And I was just like totally just like blah from it, and did not know who I could talk to about like any of this shit. And yeah, I got very depressed, got very suicidal, got very murderous. Everything everything across the board. Yeah, I had like a real like bit of like a probably like school shootery phase in there. It was good it happened during one of my lower energy periods. And it was also really good that I was still pondering the question over whether or not a single human life has positive or negative utility. I was like trying to do the math about it somehow. Like in 2025, like right at that time, like in like 2015, I was like, what is the utility of human life? And I was like really on the fence about whether it was positive or negative. And I was like, I think mine specifically is negative, but I don't know if that's true for other people. So yeah, but I was really thinking about this stuff. I kind of rederived utilitarianism. I was also doing all this stuff just thinking. I like was not really engaging with other books that much because I was reading a lot for school. I was reading a lot of Nietzsche at the time, which did not help any of this.
Hmm.
um, I got really obsessed with the phenomenon of eternal recurrence and like eternal return, and like thus spoke Zarathustra, which is also a terrifically bad move given the time. Do you know about like Nietzsche's eternal
I
recurrence?
do, yeah, but feel free
Yeah.
to say something for those that don't.
Oh, I just mean it sucks. It's like there everything repeats, but like in like the worst, most like dreadful way imaginable, where it's just like any moment you have like any time you have like an instant of like dread or fear, you can just become aware that it's infinitely long because it repeats an infinite number of times, and that like any respite that you have from it by like escape into another's type of sensation is like temporary, because anything dreadful is like infinitely long and you will come back to it. And so any hope that you have about like, oh, this is going to be over is kind of like crushed under the understanding that that moment is actually forever, and then that actually shrinks the hope and like makes it reifies it, makes it's just so bad. That was kind of my lived experience of reading like the Nietzsche and eternal recurrence stuff, because the guy who like tells like Zarathustra about it in the Spec Zarathustra is like this evil dwarf who just is keeps like being so mean. He's like this like yeah, evil dwarf that like pours lead down your throat and is evil.
Hmm.
And I was just like, damn, that sucks. And I didn't like start believing it or something. It was just like a feature. It was just like an example of where like the unground where thought experiments and like the ungrounded Western mind can go. Is like just all of these like what ifs. and like getting into the implications and feeling them like really like fuck up your internal world. And at that time I wasn't really grounded because I didn't have a strong like base world model about like knowing what was real because I hadn't made up my mind that like thermodynamics and science and physics and stuff were real. I was like, is this bullshit like everything else, kind of? And I was like, fucking, I don't know what's happening. It was like a big feature of my life. How did I get out of that? Man, took me a while. Took me a while. I have this mental image of something like being in water and not knowing which way is up, or like walking a tightrope, and that's kind of what it felt like. Like I didn't know which way was up, but I knew that I would drown if I did not figure it out. Or kind of like being on a tightrope and like one side is hell and the other side is heaven, and you don't know which is which, so you're just like, I better not fucking fall. And on one hand, like falling would be great because then you wouldn't have to do the tightrope if you got it right, but it's just really hard to know which one is right. That kind of position of being at the edge of an attractor. And I was just kind of like, fuck it, we walk the tightrope. Oh well, I don't know which one it is. Like I was oscillating between like, is it good, is it bad, is it good, is it like which one, which one, which one? And then I was like, fuck, I don't know. And then I just kind of like embraced something EA like and was just like, I'm just going to live this life hedging and like trying to do like the strategy that seems to work in like the highest number of these possible ways that the world works. And it just seems like, okay, be harmless, act with like really broad impact. Like don't focus on like a certain group of people or feel like a certain group of people is deserving. Like just like nonviolence, broad impact, simplicity, detach from other people in society as much as you can while still maintaining a position of relative leverage. Go. And I didn't know at that point in my life what I'd be capable of because I was like, am I going to be like an insane person? Then okay, I'll be like a park ranger or I'll like do fucking like landscaping for like some public thing in the city. Or I'll, that kind of thing. And if I get my shit together, then I'll like go into research and I'll do like pharmacology or I'll like try to work on like reform projects or I'll try to do like resource management shit. And that was just kind of my stance. And so it worked. I was just kind of like, ah, fuck it. And just kind of at that point, I didn't really need to withdraw from society because I had already fucked up so much that I was like, oh, very already on like the periphery, like just was like not talking to anyone or anything. So I was like, okay, whatever. This is my peaceful life where I'll just like grind my grades again and try to get into college. And I did. Um, I went to Clark University to study international development because I was like, I want to do like large scale agricultural research. I was like, oh, whatever, I'll just do large scale agricultural research management while I'm like insane. And because apparently at least I can do both at the same time. And got really disillusioned with like, got really into like the math and stuff of economics and research management stuff, but also really, really disappointed with the international development world. Like it was so political, it was so inefficient, really based, really like kind of neo-colonial and not interested in long-term outcomes. And I was kind of like, fuck, am I gonna need to do something else? Um, so got interested in thinking about like suffering at both like the like societal level where it comes from things like resource constraints and also at the individual level. Um, and so I was like, fuck, if I don't want to be in the world of figuring out like how to influence outcomes by high leverage points in like society, maybe I can think about like high leverage points inside the individual human. So I got really interested in like child development and developmental psych and started working with children and being like, what about like early interventions in kids? Because like systems are made of people, blah blah blah. So it's kind of like hedging, doing both those things. Um, I had a really wonderful group of friends there who we played a lot of D&D. And it was really good because when COVID happened, all we did together was play D&D. So when COVID happened, we could basically continue our friendship somewhat uninterrupted. And in fact, we got to play even more D&D. So at one point, we'd probably be playing D&D for like 8 hours a week, if not more. And I had a really special friend named Robbie who was the DM and just went like above and super fucking beyond. And like they're an incredible composer and they composed like soundtracks and like built the world. And so bless you and thank you, Robbie, for I think really making the pandemic not nearly as bad as it could have been. Um, and also giving me a social life or I didn't have to really do normal social life things. It's really good. Thank you, Robbie. Fucking awesome D&D campaign. Best, best I've ever seen. They killed it. Yeah, it was so good. It was such a major feature of my life. It's like, thank you, Tasha. And I'm like forgetting about things that are really important to me. Um, and then I'm remembering them again. Yeah, so I was just kind of like hanging out, doing that shit, being like, I'm gonna be fine. I thought a lot about like return on investment and opportunity costs at that time. So the way I was like feeling okay with my life is I was like based on the investment put into me and the resources I'm taking up, my like delivering good outputs. And I felt pretty good because I like, I'd gone to public school my whole life. I hadn't really been that much of a pain in the ass to anybody. I was like somewhat of a pain in the ass in high school and I felt really bad about it, just by being like logistically problematic, by like taking time off of school and being insane in the hallways and things like that. Also, oh, I also had a brain tumor at during that same time in high school, but it like didn't bother me at all because I was just so bothered by all this other crap. But it gave me a really good excuse when I came back to school because people were like, "Oh, what was wrong with you?" And I was like, "I had a brain tumor." I didn't even need to tell them. I didn't even need to tell anybody about all the other shit that was. It was really. I just remember once I found out that it wasn't going to kill me, I was like, "This is the best thing ever." I was like, "This is the best news ever." Because now I don't need to be like, well, there was a complicated psycho-spiritual interaction between my home life and the drugs I was taking and my latent schizophrenia. I was like, oh, I had a brain tumor. So, but actually the brain tumor is proven to not have anything to do with anything that happened. It's like in the wrong part of my brain. And was totally, completely unrelatedly just chugging along. But it fully just came in to be the scapegoat. Thank you, brain tumor. Yeah, and it's one of those things where like people don't want to ask about it. It's like it seems kind of complicated that the brain tumor would do all that shit and that you wouldn't need to get surgery. But nobody's gonna be like, really? They're just like, sorry about your brain tumor.
Sorry about your brain tumor.
It was fine. That was crazy. We found out because we were so just like, what the fuck is going on with Shanthi that I was enrolled in like a clinical study for where they were just like collecting data on like people with bipolar, where they just ran like every part of the studies, they just like run like every test in the world on you to collect data points. And part of it was that they gave me an MRI and then they were kind of like, uh-oh, you can't be in the study anymore. And I was like, why? And they were like, ask your mom. And I was like, ah. And yeah. So that happened. Um, time skip back to college. So I'm at Clark and I'm kind of running laps around everybody academically. Like I am way, way, way excelling in my classes. People are earnest, but they like can't really keep up debate wise. This isn't their fault. Like I was at Bard where I like took 2 years of college courses. Even though I was insane and disabled while I was taking them, I was still like 2 years of college courses and I'm very smart. Hate to say it. But I was kind of like running circles around people academically. I was feeling kind of understimulated. And more than feeling understimulated, I was kind of feeling wasted. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of way more mentally stable than I thought. I seem to be like more academically capable than I thought. If I wanted to be like a mid-tier, if I wanted to be like a bureaucrat or something, this would be fine, but I have the feeling that I could do more, especially in the realm of science. Like I feel like I could be basically, I was like, I feel like I could be doing really good science and it's worthwhile to invest in like doing really good research. So I transferred universities to Wesleyan, where one of my high school friends was going, and where I just had like good vibes, with the idea of wanting to do way more research as an undergrad. And so I went to Wesleyan. I joined like two labs. I was able to like transfer every gen ed credits. Once I got there, I could just kind of take whatever I wanted. And I lived under a rock for like the whole first year, but made two really, really wonderful friends, Frankie and Julie, who were just like friends of my heart and extremely kind and easy to spend time with. Um, and I joined a couple labs at Wesleyan, started taking like philosophy and science curriculum that felt much harder and more fun and challenging, and started like actually entering the scientific dialogue, like actually publishing papers with the things I was in labs for. Had a mentor, Sonia Sultan, who's a biologist and someone who I really, really admire, who got me like access to like the scientific way of thinking, like in collaboration with people, which felt really good. And just took like a million classes. I took like as many classes as I could, like and audited, and was in labs, and was just like fully like in the academic sauce. Um, and I got really interested. I was still interested in like thinking about scale. I was still interested in like communes and community and all the rest. Oh my gosh, this has been so long, and I'm still only
I will
like,
keep listening. I'm loving this. You're doing great.
I'm still only 19, in this story. Um, and I was really interested in community living, and I was basically thinking about systems as like about I was thinking a lot about like scale and leverage and scale and leverage and scale and leverage and like where can interventions be made that like align people, that like reduce conflict, because I was like I after being in like international development world, I was like, okay, we're basically in post scarcity, and we did it. And now I'm more interested in thinking about like ailments and like types of suffering and conflict and violence that are correlated with growth than I am interested in thinking about the ones that come out of like poverty and lack, because where we're headed, there's going to be a lot more people living in post scarcity. And we haven't solved how to make post scarcity like not miserable for a lot of people. So I started becoming a little bit more interested in that. Um, and yeah, working with Dr. Sultan was really incredible. Working with Dr. Bartha was really special. Reading a ton, just really digging in, realizing that I really could be a scientist and that I'd be an excellent one was pretty special. Not just like chugging along in a lab, like filling beakers or whatever, but like being in dialogue with other people and doing novel research and stuff was pretty exciting. um, yeah, I also joined the campus Sangha where I met a really special. Oh my God, I skipped like so much. I skipped like a whole arc. Okay. Before I transferred to Wesleyan, I worked at a summer camp. Summer camp was called Camp Ramapo for Children, and it was like the best place in the world. It's really good. It's a summer camp for young people with disabilities, ages like eight to 30. Um, and it's like a circus battle zone hospital school. I don't know. It's an amazing place because people take on a very hard mission, which is like take people who can't go anywhere else because they would get kicked out, and just like make accommodations for them so that they can like have fun with other people for a summer. And that shit was crazy. That shit was so crazy. Like it was just like absolute insanity like every single minute of every single day. Like you'd be like trying to get people to lunch, and then like somebody would just like put their foot through a plate glass window for like no reason. And like because these things were just impossible to predict. A lot of things were it was just impossible to predict because people would just do stuff for like no reason or for reasons that like cause and effect were like worked in like a different dimension there. You'd be like, somebody didn't get a bagel and that's why the toilet is orange. And you'd be like, okay, this is life. Like it really like you have to think about causality totally differently. And it shows you like really many different ways of being a human being, and made me really it shook up a lot of my like previous beliefs about like what made human life worth living, and like all of my beliefs about like return on investment or something, because some of these people in this camp were like ridiculously expensive people. Like it probably cost like $100,000 a year to like keep them alive, if not more. And they were kind of terrorizing people the entire time. Like expensive people who were like expensive and like bitey and like racist and like everything, and still so obviously like absolutely worthy, like blessed beings, totally, completely worthy of attention and love. Not only the minimum they needed to live, but like obviously a lot. And that was kind of like shaking up a lot of the ways I was thinking about the world. Because I was like, huh, all these people who it's like kind of my worst fear to be, who I like basically made in my mind that I would kill myself if I like approached some sort of like return on investment threshold way below any of these people. And then I was like, oh shit, but actually they kind of rule and are awesome and I
Mm.
love them and they are clear. And also they're clearly delivering some sort of intangible benefit to the world that I can't really put my finger on, that can't really be quantified as like better or worse in the space they take up, but it's definitely there and it's definitely like a rare and special thing that they're giving the world. Oh, yeah. Hmm. I love those kids. And I still think I don't know, there's some of those kids were like the most easy to love people I've ever met in my life. Yeah. And individual kids taught me so much. Like the first time I sang in front of a group of people alone, because I always sang in choirs and I had a really hard time singing solo. First time I sang in front of a group of people was because one of my campers like dragged me up on stage and was like sing with me. And then she just completely didn't sing because she got scared. And I was like, Lindsay, how could you do this? I was like, Lindsay, how could you do this to me? And I was like, at this moment where this like incredible, I was like, okay, like this courage. I was like, for you, I will do this if we will sing, like, I will sing together with you. And then she totally bailed. And I was like, girl, how could you? But it was only because of that that I could do it. Um, yeah, the talent shows at this place were amazing. It totally cleared like a lot of the layers of like self and other judgment I had about like taking up space. These kids were, yeah, the kids ruled. It also changed a lot of my stuff about institutions because while I was there, I was like kind of perpetually enraged by how like terribly everything was run because there was just seemingly like needless chaos and waste, which like led to like a lot of suffering for like the pretty vulnerable people in our care. This isn't like evil or anything. It's just like for these kids, like walking from place to place can be like an ordeal. And then because of the way the schedule's arranged, sometimes you just have people like walking like way too much from like point A to point B. So I was like, bah, like what if we like did like a mapping function and then we like figure this all out? And it was like very frustrating to me. But I also kind of got over it after having like a breakdown in the middle of the year. Like I went back for the next one because I actually realized like how super, super hard it is to run anything that's so chaotic. Like just taking on a project that is so chaotic, you have to accept like a really high level of inefficiency because you just don't know what the conditions are in order to be able to like plan around them. You don't fucking know what's gonna happen. Like every day, something crazy, like some building would just be like completely. We would just be like, we can't use this building today. There's somebody going apeshit inside, and probably for the next like 6 hours. So like that's we can't use the building, or like tons of stuff like that would just constantly be happening. And then I was like, you know what? Actually, like kudos to these people for like taking on the chaos, good for them for just like finding out what works. And I still like, I'm just gonna like lend a hand to it. And it was the first time I like felt good about being like a cog kind of in like a super jank machine. Cause I was like, you know what? It's a jank situation. They're doing what they can. And that felt really like a huge unlock. I also fell in love um with a young man who was extremely beautiful, and it was my first time. having someone be interested romantically in me first, because usually I am have always been the pursuer in like every kind of relationship I've ever been in. And this time I got he looked at me and I was like, whoa. Um, and I was in another relationship at the time. So I kind of kept some distance for the whole summer, but we like read books together and he was a Buddhist. And I was like, LOL, these white Buddhists. What does this guy think he knows? Blah blah blah. But then also I am a bit of a I am a yearner. I am a yearner and a romantic at heart. So I'm like, if you like something, of course I'm gonna read it. And started thinking about Buddhism a lot more and talking to him about it and considering kind of its validity again, because this was an extremely kind person. He was a really, 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 really kind person and really patient and really loving and didn't get there by like immersion in like the rational kind of way I did. When Buddhism seemed like a big part of his path. So I became curious about it again. And I started engaging with like some of the I don't know, some of the like modern Western Buddhist stuff after a long time of being like, this is dumb, because of my like early experiences with Buddhism, and then kind of finding some of the like Thich Nhat Hanh stuff to be very like, it felt like very live, laugh, love to me a little bit. I was just like, Jesus Christ, like this stuff is corny or like oversimplified. And I started actually pursuing it with like curiosity and like open-mindedness and kind of being like, meditated a couple times, and I was like, let me be slightly less judgmental. I still wasn't sold, but I was like, this is less bad than I thought. Yeah. So I back to Wesleyan. I joined the campus Sangha, started sitting regularly, started getting more interested in Buddhism, talking about it more. Basically came to the conclusion that Buddhism was completely compatible with everything I had built up so far, like all the scientific shit, and was that Buddhism was empirical, was basically like an empirical systematic approach to like human suffering based on observations of the human mind. And I was like, okay, Buddhism is actually lit. And then I went to work on this farm in Vermont where my roommate had worked, and they were a Buddhist family, of like a Buddhist scholar and his family. And I read some books in their library, as among them Joanna Macy's World is Lover, World is Self. And I was like, holy shit, this is like the most interested I've ever felt. These people know what I'm talking about. Like the understanding of like pragmatism and like purity and spirituality and Western and Eastern systems of thought and like the best virtues of each and like understanding suffering and utilitarianism, but in a way that doesn't hollow it out. Like, I was like, super, like, this is awesome. Um, and there was like language in it around like eco spirituality. And I was kind of trying to figure out what to do after college. I was planning to either go into like plant sciences and trying to work on like agricultural science and also just like maybe just like evolutionary models of development and using that for like pest control agriculture shit. And I was also interested in like clinical psych and educational reform. And I applied to a few grad programs and I was like, oh, I should try to like look around and see if anyone is doing any research related to like eco spirituality and promoting it in like rigorous ways. And I found this one program that I ended up applying to. It was Columbia Clinical Psych. And come the next year, I had gotten in. In the year previous, I lived in a very special house called Lotus House on the Wesleyan campus, which was technically like the Buddhist affiliated house, but really it was just a bunch of scientists and hippies who lived there. But it was like proto teapot. It like the makeup of the house was like meditators, musicians, physicists, and Buddhists, and people who did ecstatic dance. And people were really interested in like body work and craniosacral and like trauma and like analytic philosophy. And I was like, wait, and we had like a crazy good scene and also like friend group going on in that house. And one of the people in there was actually a teapot person, kind of teapot, sort like, in and out of it. But it was really crazy. And I felt like so connected with people. Then I moved back to New York City to go to grad school. I was living with my family and I went on the computer and made a Twitter after being like, after some events transpired and then you want to make a Twitter. after not having any social media for a really long time. And once I got on Twitter, I was on Twitter for like 6 days straight because the algorithm, I followed Ayla and then it was history. The algorithm just put me where I was supposed to go. And I was like, holy shit, all these people are thinking about evolution. Holy shit, all these people are thinking about neuro. Holy shit, all these people are thinking about computation. And all these people are thinking about Buddhism. And I was like, wait a minute, all these people are thinking about all these things together. And I was like, all these people are thinking about how all these things relate. This has never happened. And I was like, wait a minute, all these people know each other and are talking about these things together. And I was like, holy shit, these people live in Brooklyn. And then I was like, I saw Tyler Alterman, whose name I recognized from Less Wrong because I was an avid Less Wrong reader. And I was like, holy shit, that's Tyler Alterman from Less Wrong. And he's saying, does anybody have housing? And I'm trying to get a tenant in my mom's basement for March of this year. And I DM him, and he was also like, do any women have deranged essays hidden in their Google Docs? And I was like, that's me. I'm women with deranged essays hidden in my Google Docs, and I have housing. So I DM him, and I'm like, Tyler Alterman, here's my deranged essay. Also, would you like to rent an apartment from my mother? And he was like, yes. And then he came and lived in my house. And also I went and visited Fractal. And I was like felt that I went through the wardrobe into Narnia because of how magical it was. And also I was like, this place is so sane because I had stayed at like a bunch of different hippie communes. I skipped over a bunch of chapters where I went and like bounced around to a bunch of different hippie communes. One of them more important than the others, Jubilee. Um, but I was generally frustrated by how the one like they didn't seem to be thinking about stuff like resource man resource management or things like um balancing individualism and collectivism except in like very like lofty theoretical ways. And I really appreciated the way that like Andrew Priya just kind of built a layer on top of like what was pretty functional already about American society and just like borrowed all of the good stuff like money and the law. And we're like, what if we just put other things on top of it rather than being like time to invent an alternative to money and time to like invent an alternative to laws. They just kind of like fixed the stuff that didn't work and ran with the stuff that did. And I was like, that makes so much sense. And everything about it made so much sense. And I was like, holy shit, finally, a commune that makes sense. I thought I'd have to build this when I was like 40. Because that was my plan was to like go like make some money and then like when I was old, like build something. And so I was just like on cloud nine, so just like, holy shit, everything makes so much sense and it's so awesome. Um, yeah. And kept on chugging with that, like getting more involved in Fractal, also being in the grad program. And last in like the fall of this year, started to like doubt my participation in the graduate program more, just because Fractal seemed more exciting, and also because I was kind of losing faith in some academia stuff. I don't want to get into it too much, but programs are still good. I don't know. Clinical psych, meh. I'm not going to be like it's all bad because people did introduce the concept of mental health to existence and provide tons of care for people, build many institutions, provide a lot of love. Individual practitioners do really good work. But also, it's just like this paradigm. I don't know if I'm going to be able to like make good work in this. And I also realized that the kind of research I wanted to do, there was no one there who could teach me to use the methods I wanted to use um, and study the questions I wanted to study, which was kind of like, oh well. And I started being around like fractal people. I started having like much wilder predictions, I guess, about like where education was going to go, which I also think are now more accurate predictions about how education is going to go. But at the time, we weren't really thinking about AI like at all, or how people, there might be like flight from public school, like major reform. So I felt like the model we were working on about like reform might be obsolete before it ever had a chance to be enacted because the system it was attempting to reform would change so much. So, there's like a lot going on. And also, I was just like, my soul is withering and my energy is going way down. So, I moved to live with some friends in Brooklyn. And then I took a semester off from school. I had an unemployment party. Andrew Rose employed me immediately at the unemployment party. He was just like, come work for me. And he was like, okay, you need to like get people in and out of the boot camp. So now I am working at Fractal Tech trying to think about what comes next after the university, and in general, just like experiment with what education can be. And now I'm trying to solve the problem of getting people who should be in and then getting them out on the other side by getting them jobs. So doing that thing. And I'm really excited about the growth of the university. I feel like it's realistic that after kind of establishing this department, I moved to establishing some sort of like psychotech department is sort of the dream. Um, yeah, but for now, really interested in getting people who should have power in the world and who like to think about systems into the program so they can become really good software engineers and make a bunch of money and get power in the world. And then getting them jobs on the other side, I think is what I'm focused on. Yeah. Oh, big long talk. And I skipped so many people and so many things. But that's the, I guess, hour and 15-minute version of my life story. Thank you, Tashin.
How does it feel to have told that story?
It feels really good to just revisit how many people helped me out.
Hmm.
I'm just like, I was so many times, I feel like it's been a single person's intervention that's just stopped this whole thing from going off the rails.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or that has just massively saved me like 5 years of like wasted time. It's just been like some person who just let me hang around and like learn things from them. I'm
Hmm.
like, thank you, Noha. Thank you, Hutton. Thank you, Cook. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean's parents. Thank you, Mrs. Rice. Thank you, Mrs. Millage. Thank you, Cook's mom, Jennifer. Thank you, this teacher I had in high school. Thank you, that teacher I had in high school. Thank you, this childhood friend's parent who had a cool marriage. Thank you, like every so many, so many people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Gratitude.
Oh, major, 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 major.
Hmm. Well, I want to ask some questions about your life story, and then I want to ask some questions about your thinking. Uh, um, you started off by talking about being precocious and kind and righteous, and also like I forget the phrase you used, but like kind of giving people a hard time or like being intense or people not knowing what to do with you. And I wonder if you could make that a little bit more vivid, what that was like when you were young.
More vivid. One illustrative example is I started to sing before I started to speak words.
Oh,
Did you know this, Tashin?
no, I did not.
Yeah, and I also had a really wide vocabulary and strong understanding of grammar from like a really young age. So imagine like an infant baby, like no hair on their head, like actually bald ass infant child, like singing like full grammatically correct sentences on public transit. People were just like, "What the fuck?" It's like eerie. It's like on one end, it's like that you think it would be cute for like a baby to sing. It's like not. It's like kind of uncanny. It's like uncanny valley and weird.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of times in my life, I would just like exist like precociousness to the point of making people be like have to adjust. I think their understanding of like what a baby is or something, and make people kind of upset or confused. Like
Hmm.
not so much that anybody would be like that bad, but like kind of like what. Also, I think I would sometimes bring up points or whatever. Again, this is like my like autistic resource management fixation. But like if there was ever a thing where kids were like fixated on like sharing something or like upset about not all having a thing, I would be like I'd be like, we can do some math about this and like solve the problem. And the teacher would be like, no, I'm trying to take a teachable moment to teach about how like not everything's fair. And I'd be like, but simply if we if we simply adopt like this method of like rotating the thing, then everything will be fine. There'd be like lots of moments like that where it was just kind of like stuff not quite clicking or feeling like I came from another world or like feeling like the goal is not the goal. It's like, yeah, just like lots of like little like missed moments and things like that. A nice thing about it was that generally I had such like a track record of good behavior that I was generally allowed to do whatever I wanted because people were like, this one is a freak, but also an angel. So we just don't think about it too hard. Like I would get really bored in my classroom, and then my teacher would just be like, you can just go to any other classroom, like where there was a more and there was like an understanding. And I was like, she was like, you can just go be with the older kids. And then the older kids would be kind of freaked because I would be like a tiny child, like in their classroom, like trying to like do the thing that they were all like, blah, this sucks. And, but I was kind of like under the protection of like the adults. So it was kind of like nothing really happened, but I could get like bad vibes often, or like jealousy or confusion or whatever, like that kind of thing. Yeah. You know,
Hmm.
just freaking out the neighborhood.
You said that before you went crazy, you were just starting to understand some things socially. Can you describe what it was that you were starting to understand socially at that time?
I was understanding that like people are predictable and are doing predictable things. I am extremely predictable in my behavior, especially at that time, because I was working on like a very simple algorithm, which was just like try to align all people's desired outcomes and then like do thing. And if somebody's desired outcome has to be missed, like sacrifice mine. And it was just like a really simple, but like to like a floor. Like you wouldn't like, like lay yourself out on you wouldn't get up on the sacrificial altar or something, but I would like be last in line, like that kind of thing. And I was running like a very simple loop, which was super predictable. And I was just like, other people are so unpredictable. I don't know what the fuck anybody's gonna do, especially in groups. Like often I can predict what people will do one on one, but in groups, I was just like, I don't know what the shit is happening. And once I kind of understood some more game theory stuff and also thinking about stuff evolutionarily, where I was like, oh, like, we are running on hardware, which is like an organism that's like designed to optimize for fitness. And in humans, there are like complex things going on, like wealth and status, which kind of like universally enhance fitness. So it's like always wise to like acquire wealth and status. And like also, we're always constantly motivated to acquire information, intersexual competition, like blah, blah, blah. So I basically understood people as like evolutionary beings and also that like the kind of like wealth and status and information acquisition that are so generally boosting to fitness. So like they're the things that everybody wants always, like even more than we want calories. Um, that these are they often play out in like games because there's so I was like, oh, okay, people probably want one of these general resources, which is like wealth status information or something that is like a potential, like a precursor to that. You're like trying to get access to something that's a precursor for like wealth status information. And there's some kind of game going on and people are trying to like orient themselves. They're trying to sense out what the game is and like play it toward toward a win condition for them. And different people have like different, ways they play games, but that's generally what's happening. And that just really helped. I was like, okay, makes sense.
Hmm. And at times you described the experiences you had around, I think 16, was it? You were 16 when?
Yeah, 16, 17, yeah.
At times you described those as like I was going crazy, and at times you described it as in like manic episodes or whatever, and then at times you were like, oh, I was having mystical experiences, and I'm wondering if you can like, yeah, how do you make sense now of what that was at that time?
I think it was kind of both. Like I think I was having genuine mystical experiences. Like I was having my senses became much clearer. I had no self experiences. I had like extreme closeness to God, like tons of energy. And I also went a little crazy trying to process and understand what was happening and trying to communicate it to other people and figure out like, are these experiences I can talk about? Is the information I'm getting real? Can I act on it as if the implications are true? Like I was kind of going nuts around that. And also struggling a bit to cope with like the awareness of how like quote unquote fallen or how much hurt there is in the world and how actually wrong it is for us to allow it. Because prior to this, I had a belief. I thought about a lot about like education and privilege, and I had a sort of belief that like it's really wrong for people to behave in a certain way if they are privileged and educated and aware enough to not do it. Was my belief. And after this experience, I was kind of like, oh, it's really wrong for anybody to do this. And it doesn't matter if you don't know, because wrongness is not about like whether or not what you're doing is politically correct or will get you in trouble. Wrongness is just about like wrongness hurts the person doing wrong as well as it hurts their victim. So it doesn't really like there are universal standards of behavior for the ways that we can treat each other. And yeah, it's bad. Was basically the thing. I'm gonna eat something while I talk to you. Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So like all of the above, basically. It
All of
was.
the above, yeah. And they weren't. It's not that they was all the same thing. It was just that like lots of different things were going on.
Hmm. That
Uh,
makes sense.
yeah.
Um, I guess this is maybe a strange question, but that this is the same shape of a question, but kind of zoomed out. Like, if you were yourself, but not yourself, listening to everything you just said, how would you describe from the third person, like what kind of a person Shanti is?
Oh yeah, yeah. I have a huge blind spot around this. I like don't know what's going on. Mm,
Is that true? I don't believe you.
I have a big blind spot around self around
I
myself.
believe that you have a blind spot, but I don't believe that you don't know what's going on.
No, I do know what's going on, but it's hard to look at everything I know about the world and like things that happen and then try to use that information to answer the question of what kind of person is Shanti. It's gonna take me a
Well,
minute.
maybe I'll ask it a different way that might be a little bit easier and less, because it's kind of a socially awkward question also to be like, describe yourself accurately, in some ways, especially. Anyway, so what I would say is when I hear that story, and I mean, and when I know you, but I'll focus on that story. I see someone who's highly unusual, who's incredibly intelligent, who is very wise, has had experiences that have been the basis of wisdom, and is also very compassionate, who cares about ethics and the world and well-being of individuals and groups and the world and animals and plants, and a young woman who is having difficulty squaring all of those different capacities and fitting them all together. Like, how do I be really how do I square all the things that I am have access to internally and externally? Like, how does this all fit together? What a puzzle.
Yeah. I mean, what
Is
kind
that
of
missing something? Is that would you describe it totally differently?
no, I think it's pretty good. Yeah, that one of the things is just like highly unusual. I'm like, yeah. But I'm like, does that even give anybody any information? I'm like, I
Well,
don't
you just told a very unusual story. That gives lots of information.
or I mean, I think unusualness is the overwhelming feature of my experience of myself and socially, and it's also, I mean, for me, it's all I've ever known. So I'm not like surprised by myself.
It's usual that you are unusual.
I'm like, this is just how I am. But
Yes.
socially, or like, what kind of person are you? Or if you ask me to compare myself to other people, the overwhelming feature is unusualness. And I
Hmm.
think that's also true for other people. When they perceive me, the overwhelming experience they have is one of unusualness and also intensity. So I'd say like very strange, very intense are the two largest features. I think to the point where it sometimes makes people glitch out around like they're like whatever perception system they're using to like determine traits about people just like super glitches out when they encounter
I
because
wouldn't know anything about that.
they're like, wait a minute, is this good or bad or dangerous or not dangerous
Hmm.
or like a threat to my status or not a threat to my status or like a thing I can use or a thing I can't use. And people are just like, what? I'm
I'm
not
speak
sure that happens a lot.
I'm speaking more to myself for the record here, but my consistent experience of you has been good but confusing. I've never doubted whether you're a good person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's cool.
I think you've been an invitation to expand. I mean, really, everyone is. Well, two things. You've been an invitation to expand my sense of what a person is and what the world is. And well, I want to come back to you saying unusual. Like, I think you are highly unusual, and there's a reason you say that. And also, from the vantage point that I try to see in my way of seeing, like, everyone can be seen as unusual and can be like witnessed in the kind of depth that your story just made. Your story, because you told it and because it's an interesting story also, but like it made it easy to see for someone how it's unusual, I think. But I think everyone's story can have that kind of like granularity or detail or vibrancy if you know under the right circumstance. But if you work to see it, you can see that in everyone. And you're unusual. But
Yeah.
anyway,
I mean, just I think there's something super fucking weird going on in here, like cognitively. And
yeah,
I think it's just like upside down and in another language or something. Like I don't know. I feel like it's like if you were trying to write, if you made like a person and then you just like tried to write a person like in another language, and then like functionally and it ended up with like a lot of the same functions and capacities. But if you like it structurally just looks totally different because of the constraints of whatever language it was written in are just like totally different.
mhm.
And then like every now and then you like try to like it tries to like do a thing that like a person can do. It's like actually, oh, you can't do that, or like, oh, actually you need to like do all these other things to make it happen just because it's like on a different it's on a different system. Really, like that's kind of how it feels.
That makes sense.
I don't know.
That's a good metaphor. I like it. I
Yeah.
like it. Uh-huh.
It also means that there's like a lot of random things that are like hard for other people that it's just super easy for no reason.
Hmm. Seemingly no reason.
Seemingly no reason. I mean, no like huge reason. It's just
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm just like running this other thing. Therefore,
Uh-huh.
it's fine.
Huh.
So that happens all the time. Um, I'm like this last year, I've been like the least oriented I've ever been. I've been kind of feeling like it's important for me to just sort of hang out at the Schelling point that is fractal and then just like see what happens. But this is kind of an exception to the rule, with the rule being that I'm usually super, super oriented and just like boom on some kind of very, very, very directed path.
Hmm.
And my general approach to life is like develop a hypothesis about what I should be doing, pursue it completely wholeheartedly, and then either something awesome happens or like fall into a pit. And either way, that like either way, that's information. And I'm like, oh, now I guess I was wrong because I'm at the bottom of a hole. Um, time to get out, and then incorporates this information into adjusting my hypothesis, and then or something awesome happens, and I'm like, huh,
Huh.
we can reject the null hypothesis at least, which is that nothing would happen if I did this. And that's good. That seems to be chugging along because usually when I develop an idea about how the world works, my the outcomes that are possible are either like my life is going to get really awesome, I'm going to be homeless, or nothing's going to happen at all. And yeah, I try to run at things,
That's
and
that's
something.
so funny because that's such a both an really, really unusual way to live and also like kind of isomorphic with a really standard, if exceptional way to live. Like I think a lot of magnanimous people have lived something that's very similar. Like they basically live wholeheartedly, but the specific way you describe it is highly unusual. Yeah. Um, I noticed that I'm curious, and I'd like to ask all the questions I'm curious about. What made that D&D campaign so good? What was good about it?
Oh, we were just all really into it. Like everybody played their character really earnestly, and I think we all really cared about it being very good. People were humble. Like one thing that really will fuck up your experience of playing a tabletop role-playing game is if you're proud. Like you have to be able to get silly with it. You have to do like a bad impression. You have to like roll the charisma check that goes poorly and then totally like step on your toes and like fuck up and like you're just fucking up in front of your friends on like high stakes missions like constantly. And if you're just like trying really hard not to fuck up, trying really hard not to fuck up, then that like ruins the game. But you also have to take it seriously enough that you can all like not break immersion and there's like a real sense of stakes. So I think we all it took a and also just we had so much time. We played for like 2 years or like 2.5 years. Like we had enough time to like really sink into it and like find our voices and find our characters and find the relationships between each other. And also Robbie was just like killing it as a DM. They like made a really immersive world with like really beautiful storytelling. They were very inspired by The Adventure Zone, which is a D&D actual play podcast
Hmm.
from the McElroy brothers and their dad, which was a really fucking it's like the best piece of one of the best pieces of narrative media I've ever consumed. It's so good. Um, and really I think understood the potential of the storytelling form of D&D and they killed it. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how that shifted you as a person to have that experience?
Um I think it was really nice to play a game that was facilitated by a game like this that was facilitated by someone else, where I could really just like trust the process, but also I could participate. I think prior to that, I'd kind of had like a distinction in my mind between like people who are good at things and people who aren't in like any specific domain. And I would have either felt like, oh, I'm the best, so I have to like run this, or oh, I'm nowhere near as good as somebody else, so I should just like observe. And this was like a nice middle ground where I could actually see myself like shifting things and whatever. And also it was good for like experimenting with the play style of D&D, like similar to Pride. Like you can't think about optimization that much in D&D. It's like you can. It's really fun. You can do it on the individual level. But when it comes to like the plot and to encounters and stuff, it's not actually that fun for anyone if you're like, here, I'm like optimizing for the like conflict-free solution. It's like actually no, that like isn't the best narrative outcome or like the most fun to play. So like relaxing on that a little was cool. Mostly it was just an experience that I had. I don't think it was like that transformative. It was just really, really good. It was just like a place to like sink into and be and love. And it was also just such a profoundly generous act from Robbie
Hmm.
to run like I don't know, it feels like hundreds of hours. Yeah, hundreds of hours of like holding the frame and keeping a world alive for us to hang out in. It was like
Hmm.
really cool of them.
Hmm.
Robbie.
Beautiful. Okay, let's dive into your thinking.
Okay,
Um,
now you know the creature behind the madness. I wonder if it like makes me more will be like more compelling as an author or like less. I can't tell yet. Guess it'll depend
oh,
on the person.
what's the very last thing you said?
I guess it'll depend on the person.
Yes. For me, it makes the thinking much richer and makes me, well, and who you are as a person is what makes me interested in your thinking, actually. And then when I've read your thinking, it's like, oh, this is also incredibly important on its own terms, I think. But I don't know, they're mutually supportive for me, I guess is what I'm trying to, for me. And I'm the one hosting this conversation. I'm very curious what someone listening to this would think, but here
It's
we
your
are.
podcast, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. It's literally Tashin's podcast, Reach Truth, Tashin's podcast. So here we are. Um, let's see. Um, I guess, well, and so for context for someone listening, currently at least your Twitter has a link to a Google Doc that
Oh
is
yeah.
thing I'm asking about.
And read
And
everybody's comments.
yeah, um, I want to ask about your bio that is associated with it. It says like, let's align biological and spiritual imperatives. Like, and this whole document is about the relationship between basically scientific thinking and evolutionary thinking, and then uh, something like Buddhism. I don't know. And I like at least up until this point, for me personally, most of the times I've been exposed to Buddhism, they're not particularly on about evolution necessarily. And most of the times I've been exposed to evolutionary thinking, they're not necessarily on about Buddhism. I suppose my teacher would be an exception, and there are some things I've seen, but like by and large, they're like totally distinct islands of like ways of life or thinking or value systems. And so like why give me some context about that? Why would you think that that's even a thing to do in the first place, or how does that make sense? It makes a lot of sense when you read the essay, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but how would you frame that?
Okay, so a unifying frame for all of this for me is sustainability. So I'm very interested in people being suffering less and having a good time, being happy, being kind to each other, all the rest. And I feel like people have solved the problem of how to get there. Like we know how, basically, to be happy, and we know how to be nonviolent. And something that I've been really concerned about, just I see it as like the problem of sustainability kind of being the problem of our age. Like we've made a society that is really nice to live in, and now we're kind of just like, how do we spread this standard of life to the few places in the world that don't have it? And how do we not fuck it up? Like how do we make a standard of life that feels good to live and doesn't undermine the conditions of its own existence? Um, so likewise with something anything good, like Buddhism, it's kind of like how do you design a Buddhism that spreads and then maintains itself and doesn't undermine the conditions of its own existence? We can see something like the monastic vow of celibacy in a way can undermine the conditions of Buddhism's own existence because if you have a bunch of people who like become awakened and then don't preach and then don't have families, it's like and then that little pocket of Dharma can kind of like disappear. This is my understanding from before being like, oh, past lives and like reincarnation into like thought forms and like rivers. I don't know, but this is my ignorant understanding of that. So it's kind of a sustainability question for me. When I think about what is sustainable, a really good way to achieve sustainability is to kind of hop on the coattails of evolution, which is a process which is kind of everywhere and is really mighty and is really good at perpetuating itself. So aligning a process with the desire for like life to live is a pretty good little like sustainability hack. There are other things to do, like you can just like close loops and stuff. But part of being sustainable, like if you think about an organism, right? Like that wants to be sustainable, there's a kind of baseline problem which is maintaining homeostasis. Like you have to be able to maintain like your form from like 1 second to another. So that's the kind of a prerequisite for being able to reproduce or survive or like do anything else. So you have to have like a kind of like the loops have to be balanced, like the amount of oxygen you're taking in and like CO2 you're putting out have to be like balanced. And there's ways to get like more sustainability by like, decreasing the amount of resources that you need or building like kind of closed loops where there's like very little net resource required. But there's another sustainability problem, which is like just how do you not get out competed? Because you can be a little like, I don't know, some little organism that's like a worm or something that has like super slow metabolism, like you hardly need any resources ever. You would seem like why isn't every organism like this? Or why isn't this like the most sustainable body plan? It's because something will eat you. You'll just something will just eat you if you're just kind of sitting around having a super slow metabolism. Like you won't starve, but you will be eaten. So then it comes to being like you have to be competitively viable if you want to be sustainable. So there's like, yeah,
Hmm.
this is the puzzle. So basically, sustainability was way in. And when I'm thinking about the process of making something sustainable, it's the same thing as kind of making it live, like live and proliferate.
Hmm.
There's also just another answer to that question, just like this is how I think.
Hmm.
Like everything goes back through the evolution function, the thing that's running that's thinking about evolution all the time. Everything goes back through it.
Right.
And to me, it seems obvious.
Hmm. Okay, that's helpful. I want to ask about the name of the document and the diagram that's at the beginning, which is a model from another post that you linked to. And the title of the document is Evolutionary Darsana,
I think it's Darshana, but I'm actually
Darshana. Great. Tell me what I mean, tell me what you how you would verbally say what that is. Tell me what that is.
um so there's a word religion in like the Western canon, like world of like philosophy and practice and stuff, which often implies like a level of faith or tradition. Like the religion is something that's handed down that you have some level of faith in. And darshana is something that's kind of similar to religion in its function. It's like it contains a cosmology, it contains a metaphysics, it explains like why things are the way they are, and how things work. But it's the assumption is that it doesn't have to be transmitted in the same ways a religion is transmitted. A darshana can be like something like Buddhism, where it's fundamentally empirical, and or like Western science, I guess, where it's like fundamentally empirical, and you can take things at their word, or you can kind of go and investigate yourself and find the same stuff. So something like the more Vedic texts, or like Buddhism, where they go down to like theories of the atom that have been like observed, and people are recording their observations and experiences. Um, yeah, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
It's evolutionary because of evolution stuff.
Um, you said it includes a cosmology and like a metaphysics and um, I guess I want to ask about ethics, which you've cared about your whole life. And this document, at least, it's very interesting. I don't really, it's very hard for me to wrap my head or heart around about that. Like, it seems both that it cares about something in that direction, but is slightly differently shaped or like, for example, just to make it very specific, I say, this isn't a quote ethical system. Based on my observation and understanding of several processes in the universe and how they interact, I say ethical because there's no good or bad in my system, just causes and effects one might seek to pursue or avoid certain consequences. That's so hard for me to wrap my head and heart around, and like, please help.
Yeah. Mm, with like Western science, for example, it just kind of gives you a lot of information about how stuff works. And if you think hard about it in like a decompartmentalized way, you can see that like you can see truths like there is no individual body, like we are composed of the will of like millions of subagents. We are all one. Everything that we have, we owe to like our animal predecessors. Like you can see all these things. You can see the truth that like no one is superior to anyone else. We are all just like causes and effects. That all exists, but Western science will not like say that to you. It just kind of like puts all the facts on the table and understands like based on people's identities and what they're interested in, they will or will not put those pieces together. And that's kind of where this is at, I guess. Like if you look at this and you see like one of the claims that I make is that like a society which prioritizes like wealth and happiness and fitness will outcompete others. You can see that claim and you can be like, good. I care about those things, therefore it's good to know that things are looking good for me. Or you could be like, fuck, I want to win, but I hate these things. How can I design some sort of system that can fight that? Or how can I, or like aesthetically, that seems really bad to me. How can I design a thing that can be like a competitor to this or like slow the growing dominance of this thing that I aesthetically don't like? Like I see comments in the doc that are like that, where people are like, but this outcome would be sad because then people would be like bugs. And I'm like, I personally love bugs. But if aesthetically you're like, this is grating to me and terrifying, then or like you can people will have different reactions to it. And I have a certain identity or lack thereof or whatever, where these things seem like kind of easy to swallow for me. Um, but I also don't feel so compelled. Like I'm not in my like EA period where I feel like really compelled to like speed along towards the best outcome at like max speed. So I'm not like, holy fuck, we must convert everyone to this thing right now. It's more me trying to understand. I mean, I'm trying to make predictions. And when you hear prediction about the world, you can be like, I want to get on the right side of this prediction, or you can be like, oh no, I really hate what this prediction says. How can I change the world so that this prediction doesn't come true? Or you can just be like, man, I think this prediction's wrong.
Hmm.
So I suppose that's my stance. Like to me, there's like a clear ethical implication here. Um, but I know that it'll depend on where people are coming from.
And you didn't necessarily want to spell it out in this document. You wanted it to also, following the scientific tradition, let it be an implication or something people put together. No?
Yeah, I just kind of want to
Hmm.
leave it there.
Hmm.
I think it's interesting. I think a lot of people are not quite putting two and two together. No offense, that I'm saying like a certain outcome is likeliest to win, and a certain outcome is also likeliest to reduce suffering. And I'm not saying therefore we should do that, or like you're fucked up if you don't. I want to,
Hmm.
but that's a result of kind of where where I'm at. I don't think it's like the only reading by far
Hmm.
of this thing to like take it on as your to be like, oh, obviously I want to do this, and I think this is a great outcome.
Yeah, you do talk, I think it's in one of the other documents you linked to, but you talk about multiple possible outcomes and futures and stuff like that. And maybe one of those would be more preferable to someone else or something. But um,
Yeah, I think it's people like I talk about like unhappy, super technologically advanced civilizations being dominant in some cases. And when I say unhappy, I'm talking about people who are like not very peaceful or like awakened in this like kind of Satchitananda happiness frame. It doesn't mean these people aren't like having a good time. It doesn't mean they don't like go to parties and feel stimulated and like make art and consume art and like have like drama and play and fun. It's like people could very well be having all of those things. And I think for some people, that's their identity and their idea of happiness, and it's preferable to them to imagine that like a society where there's like a lot of like drama and misery, but also like a certain material standard of well-being is like the good case, and that is far a superior way of living than to be like a blissful, at peace, low-tech person who has like more like disease,
hmm.
material suffering. So I'm like open to like people have different understandings of which of these outcomes is best. I'm just trying to talk about like how I see them interacting and playing out and how to orient towards the one that I want to see. I
Hmm.
also see all of these outcomes as fundamentally like unachievable in absoluteness. The same way that, in like one of the Mahayana vows, we say like sentient beings are numberless, I vow to save them. It's kind of like this. It's like the steady state of one of these comes at like the perfection of the at the perfection of these variables, and like it will always be in tension. It's the same way with like evolution is a completely ongoing process. There's no way to create like the perfect organism. It's like by the time you create the perfect organism for a niche, it's like the ecology is shifted and the niche is shifted and like what would actually be optimal is shifted, and also like predation, like all these things arise. So when people talk about how grim or depressing it would be for this steady state to exist, I kind of like good news. It won't.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's
Things
like
will still be impermanent.
yeah, it's kind of the same thing about like being like, oh no, it'd be so sad if like if samsara ended for all beings, that would be so boring. I'm like, luckily we like don't have to worry about that like ever. It's gonna take so long, and it's gonna be back before we can ever finish it. You know, it's like if we're beating back the weeds and people are like, no, the weeds. I'm like, we are only ever gonna be able to deal with a fraction. Don't worry. We're not gonna have
Fascinating.
we're not gonna have too much peace, and survival will not be too easy, I promise. No matter if we aim for this, if we aim for this with if every human being in the world got 100% on board with this tomorrow, and we all dedicated the rest of our collective existence to striving toward it, we would never be like, oh, this is it's oh no, everyone's enlightened and now it's more like
Uh-huh.
I believe I believe it's a pretty hard problem.
Huh.
Like I believe this is quite a hard problem. And yeah,
Very good. That's helpful context.
yeah.
Um, can you tell me about how you started to think about these topics and like in particular like what influences are in the background that would make it possible for you to even write something like this? Like which thinkers and lines of thought have been an inspiration for you and influenced you?
Yeah, I'll say um I am like kind of really reactively independent about the way I think.
Hmm.
I really, really love other people's writing, but I cannot take it a single source as like good. I have to like go back and vet and be like, does this align with everything I already know about everything? Or already think about everything and all that. I'll say I link a couple of resources
Hmm.
in this. I love, I don't know, I just love thinking about thermodynamics.
Uh,
Newton, I guess. Newton, I guess.
uh-huh.
Let's go Newton. Darwin. Um, I've actually never read The Selfish Gene, but I believe Dawkins is right about everything.
Hmm.
I like just looked at the book and was like, I understand you. I don't know, something a weird event like that happened where I was just like, I don't need to read this. It's fine. Um, God, I'm also so bad at like remembering specific texts. I don't know. I've read a lot of freaking books. I've read a lot of Western philosophy, read a lot of econ stuff. I read the news.
Uh-huh.
Love Joanna Macy.
Yeah, how about on the like Dharma side?
Into Buddhism. Um, on the Dharma side, how does one even pick up Buddhist concepts? I don't know. I feel like I kind of pick them up by you meditate, you observe phenomena, you develop interpretations of the phenomena. Then you're like, does this align with like the existing vibes and teaching? Okay, yeah, then probably what they're teaching is kind of the thing that I'm on. And every now and then I read like a text, like I read like Walpola Rahula's like what the Buddha taught and stuff, and I was like, yeah, this kind of seems like the same thing that I've been doing. And Joy Macy's World is Lover, World is Self, and the work that reconnects. I'm like, yeah, this all seems kind of like the same thing. Um, that
Hmm. You talk in really all of the documents that you link about how it's important to you with these essays to write in a non-poetic style, to be as plain as possible. Um, what would this look like if you did have that pathos in it and you were leaning hard into that, having this be like a persuasive, beautiful, poetic, inspiring vision? What would that look like?
mm,
And what would it say also? And I ask both because I'm curious, but also I think that my mind and heart work more that way, and so I've like worked to understand this document and like what is she talking about? But it's
thank you, Tasha.
it's much easier to do that with a story for me. Like like this conversation I started with your life story. Like that's my way in, and so that it's also out of a desire to understand what you're actually saying.
Yeah, realistically, I think it would be a story. I think it would be like something like taking those little like the case studies when I talked about like what happens if these variables are out of whack with each other and doing something like have you read Yudkowsky's Three Worlds Collide
I have not.
story? It's a short science fiction story about like three civilizations meeting in outer space, kind of like in like a first contact thing. And one of the first, I think it's the first or like one of the first like species that like humanity makes contact with is this like hyper intelligent super cooperator hive sort of society. And well, okay, I'm just gonna summarize. If I keep talking, I'm just gonna end up summarizing the whole thing. But it's just a really good illustration of what would happen if like three organisms with three collective organisms with three really different survival and like collectivizing strategies collided and how they would orient towards one another. Pretty cool. Um, so I think it would be something like that, where I would take a look at like what are the lives like of people who are living in like the tech and reproduction maxed, but like less awakened world versus the like awakenedness and reproduction maxed world where there's low tech versus like, and I looked at all of those and kind of had a world where these civilizations are kind of at war or in competition with more likely at competition with one another in like the various ways that would make sense through like trade and commerce and whatnot, and having people living in those.
Do you think you would enjoy that as a project? The facial expression is strong.
Uh, um, if I wasn't so busy,
In the world where that was feasible and you had the space and time, you would enjoy it, you're saying.
yes. But also, I get a little frustrated because, like, the way it's at now is I'm like I've really done a lot of work making sure that what I'm writing isn't just what I want to hear. And when you write a story, as an author, you have so much freedom because it's your world, that you can really create. And then I can be like, well, of course, the protagonist who lives in my favorite society would be more happy and compatible with it, and the other ones would be more sad, and it would just be really hard to try to approach rigor and fairness in my storytelling while also being compelling. And I don't know how I would do that. I think it might have to be a collaborative thing where I like, and with like maybe with some level of randomness where I like choose three protagonists and I try to base them as closely as possible on people I know in real life. And then I like pick names out of a hat and choose who ends up where, something like that. And then I think about how events would actually transpire. Because
Hmm.
right now it'd be hard to hold myself to any sort of standard of rigor.
Why is that important to you, that rigor?
When I read stories, like it's hard for me sometimes to learn a lesson from it if the lesson is like something the author obviously wrote the story to teach, because then I'm like,
Like you don't really trust it.
yeah, I'm like, the story didn't actually, I'm like, it's kind of backwards for science. It's like if you had a hypothesis and then you made up the data, and then you're like, therefore, the hypothesis is obviously true because you can see I made up all of this data that says it is. Like if I wanted to write a story about how like high tech societies are, if I had an idea that high tech societies are bad, so I wrote a story about a bad high tech society, and then I was like, here you go, without making any sort of attempt at trying to illustrate a good high tech society. it would be so lame. Like I might have to take on some sort of like reverse, right? Like I don't know. Like when I've read like sci-fi stories or anything like that, I'm just kind of like, oop, I'm gonna like, well, that does sound bad. However, I don't think that it's ever gonna like I think you just made that up. I don't think that was like a real like I don't know, I don't think that was a real problem.
I'm
Like
hearing that I get which is something you said earlier, but that you care about the truth, and it would be hard to go down that direction and stay close to the truth.
yeah.
Okay.
Or not necessarily, but it would be hard to I'm imagining a reader who's someone a lot like myself. Um and in those situations I want like data or something. And it's why sometimes in sci-fi stories like I can really believe them when it seems like they just set up a world with certain preconditions and then they like try as best as they can to like rigorously render what would actually happen in that world. Like Dune.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
I'm like, hell yeah. Um, or sometimes when people look at something that's actually happening in real life and then they try to extrapolate, I'm kind of like, cool. That also, I'm interested in also in reading about that because it's like you're just kind of emphasizing features of reality
Mm-hmm.
and extrapolating from them. And I don't have to believe that like the way you're extrapolating is the way that it will go, but there like is something there. An example of that is something like A Brave New World, where it was kind of looking at the technologies of like birth birth control in society and then extrapolating from there fundamentally. I think that's kind of what the story's about.
Hmm.
You know, there's like lots of interpretations of it, but that's one. Um, I think that's kind of cool. But if I have like this feels like more like fantasy to me than sci-fi or something. And it's like when I read fantasy, like Lord of the Rings or something, I can really learn a lot from like the archetypal stories and like interactions between characters and relationships that are going on. But I don't come away with conclusions like if orcs existed, they would be bad or something. It's like I don't actually know. Like I don't have an idea like if something orc-like existed in real life, it would suck because I'm like, no, Tolkien just wanted to make a bad guy and then he invented the orc.
Hmm.
He didn't like think of the orc and then like based on rigorous thinking determined that they would be bad.
Hmm.
It just happened the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know. That's why yeah. But there are ways this could be done. And I'm really like there are ways this could be done, but I would have to design it in a pretty specific way. I would have to like start with our world as it is, or like a similarly like well mapped world that I feel like I understand, and then like introduce some sort of factor that would like speed up this process and then like actually try to think about how it would go.
Hmm.
Or I would need to do something like maybe write the story backwards, which is like start with one of the other types of civilization and then try to make like a good faith utopian argument for it and then just see what would result. Such a thing. Yeah.
Hmm. You mentioned Dune, and at the end of the essay, you frame what you've already written in terms of Dune.
Love Dune. Let the three people who ever listen to this podcast know Dune is a perfect
I bet those people know that Dune is good.
Dune is a
Uh,
perfect book.
uh, um, and there will be more than three in time.
Okay.
Um, that said, well, let me just read this for the record and then ask my question. Okay, Dune thing I'm keeping at the end so as not to alienate non-Dune enjoyers, and also TBH so that people don't think I got this idea from Dune. Fair. Um, let that be known. My whole thesis is basically just what if the Bene Gesserit project was a public, open source, duocratic process? What if the engineering slash breeding of memes and cultures was an intentional, conscious project, not of a shadowy cabal of priests, but of anyone who cared enough to participate? Um, say what now? Tell me what that means.
um so yeah, I'm making predictions about what will happen if cultures lead to a certain combination of civilizational traits being prioritized. But in order for something like that to even happen, it helps for civilizations to have cultural priorities, which we kind of don't, or like, we do, but they haven't been like created intentionally, really. And the United States, I'd say, is the best example in the world slash universe of a culture that formed from like having certain values in common. And I wouldn't say that those values that were foundational to the country's founding are still our primary values now, but they're still kind of up there, and they still have influenced the values that do exist now. And the Dune, the Bene Gesserit have were founded basically to preserve humanity, and the way that they thought about preserving humanity was post Butlerian Jihad. They were like, we need to arrange like certain kind of marriages among the elites in order to like preserve and advance civilization, and also to bring about the existence of this like one prophesied person who will like lead the world into its golden age. And the idea there is that like you just there will at some point just be so many humans that the population is so resilient that it's unlikely to ever be wiped out, even by like a huge existential threat. So that's kind of the end goal. And they start like manipulating families and manipulating cultures, and they do things like they plant prophecies and like the Fremen communities like hundreds of and thousands of years before the prophet's supposed to arise, so that once he does, they'll like recognize him because they see that these prophecies and like blah blah blah. And they do this kind of shit like everywhere. Um, and just thinking about how it would be a really different project if humanity decided like, or groups of humanity were just like, hey, we want to live, or we want to not suffer as much, or we want to live and not suffer as much. And then we're kind of like, okay, based on that, what kind of culture should we have, instead of kind of the culture arising somewhat unconsciously, or the culture being handed down on shoulds and shouldn'ts, and then just having whatever consequences it does, as it has been kind of historically. Yeah.
Hmm. Talk to me about the three core variables that you are uh, thinking about in this essay, and what they are specifically. How would you describe what they are?
Yeah. It's wealth. I have it as wealth, fitness, and Satchitananda, right?
I think it was happiness, but then the answer to happiness is Sachinananda,
Yeah.
if I was following correctly.
There's different theories of happiness. I'll go on. Like in something like you'll see in like some of the rationalist and EA literature is there's like utility, which is something I don't even know what utility is, man. Like it's something like happiness like, but also you can have negative utility if there's suffering. You can have positive utility if there's like happiness, but it's not really clear what happiness is. It's something kind of like hedonism or pleasure because it can apparently go infinitely up.
Hmm.
Um, when you read about a lot of this kind of thing, I don't know. And there's also like fun as measured in like the rationalist lit, but people are like fun is like the highest good, or like the most like as opposed to just like pure pleasure. There's like fun, which is like I guess like more intelligent and lively and stuff. I'm the kind of happiness I'm not like anti-fun or something. I just think that it's not as objective of a thing, or and it's also like harder to measure its impact because I don't know, fun like interests. Sometimes fun makes people be nice. Sometimes fun makes people be. I don't know. But there's like the Buddhist happiness, which is like emptiness, dream entry, Satchitananda, which is these kind of like bliss awakened oneness states, which are very low on suffering, but they also mark a kind of threshold point where you start being able to have way more control over your responses to various stimuli in the environment. So once you've kind of entered this state, you have the ability to kind of toggle up and down how pleasant different sensations or different like inputs in the environment are. So it's something like once you're in this state, you're like baseline pretty chill, and then you also have access to stuff like the jhanas, where you will never really have to design a society where people have to have entertainment or something again, because people can just like pleasure and fun are not societal problems anymore.
Hmm.
You can still, it's not like everybody just has to sit around like doing jhanas all the time, but it just becomes, you got to kind of solve it or something. The same way that there's like threshold points in terms of wealth, where you kind of solve something major when you hit something like UBI and universal healthcare. It's kind of like, okay, wealth can still be like infinitely accumulated to like infinitely improve people's material quality of life and to invest into things like defense tech, but you've hit something really major once you hit like UBI and healthcare.
Can you give brief definitions to happiness, fitness, and wealth?
Yeah. So these are things that are kind of coming from the evolutionary frame, like plus what I care about,
Hmm.
where fitness in this situation should actually be kind of a word like fecundity or something should be used instead because I'm measuring it in terms of like number of offspring or like offspring creation potential, which is different from just like raw fitness. Um, so maybe I should use a word like fecundity or something. There isn't really a word for this. It's kind of hard to measure. Like it's kind of hard to describe, but it's like how many reproductive potential and action on that reproductive potential.
What does that look like specifically?
What it looks like specifically is like, is this society reproducing?
Hmm.
And if so, at what rate? And is it creating both like the potential and the push to drive that potential, like to actually act on that potential later?
Hmm.
Because right now in our society, you could say that we like more people are capable of having offspring than ever before in terms of people being like healthy and alive and having enough money to feed their kids or like having enough food in the
Hmm.
environment to feed their children. They will like actually be fertile, like because they're not starving or have diseases, and then their babies will actually live. But people are not acting
There's
on,
more possibility and lower birth rates.
yeah, there's more possibility in lower birth rate. So that isn't
Mhm.
actually,
That isn't the thing it's
that
part of,
isn't
but not the
that
whole
isn't the
thing.
thing. It has to be like actually people.
Both high potential and high actualization, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that's fitness, roughly.
Yeah. Yep.
Wealth
And
and happiness.
wealth is just like materially how abundant and strong your society is. So this covers just like like how much resource.
Would that include GDP or would that be, GDP be missing something there?
It's GDP, but it also has to include things like intellectual capital,
Hmm.
just like all the kinds of capital you can have. So
Hmm.
a really good representation of wealth would be like how fed and healthy can citizens be? Like, can you just like afford to keep your citizens? And also like how good is your best bomb?
Hmm. Hmm.
Something like that. And how wealth can be bottlenecks on both those things. Like if you're not wealthy enough to provide universal health care, that's a problem. And you're not wealthy enough to have the best military, that's a problem. And if you're not wealthy to do both of those at the same time, that's a problem. So yeah, just wealth.
So it includes economic factors as sort of contemporarily understood, but not limited to that. It
Yeah, but not,
includes like a lot of other things also.
yeah. I would say
Hmm.
that like the mature product of this is like your society is better resourced than the other society for
Hmm.
whatever activities the society is doing, like people being alive and like winning wars and like being culturally dominant, all those things.
And just to check, it sounds to me from hearing you talk at least about these two that maybe even all three of these variables are things that um, are like directional or thematic, where they're ultimately qualitative, but that you would probably want to quantify them and want to have various metrics about them. Is that true?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, yeah, they're kind of quantitative, like with the reproduction thing. It's just like straight up, are you multiplying more as a civilization or not? Are there more people in your group than there used to be?
Hmm.
That can kind of be it. And the same thing with resourcing. It's just like, is your country falling behind others in a way that's bottlenecked on resource? Just like, do you not have a bigger military because you just don't have the money for it? That kind of thing would be that would be the kind of question. Or like, are your citizens starving and it's not because you want them to? Then
Hmm.
that I mean that's like a wealth. That's a wealth problem. Wanting to build a bigger bomb, but like not having the resources is a wealth problem.
Hmm.
If you have money and if you have like all this wealth and you can't translate it into human capital because the smart humans who would help you build the bomb are not interested in living in your shitty culture, that's not a wealth problem.
Hmm.
That's more of like the Satchidananda, like
Hmm.
happiness problem. Because if you were, yeah, so that's kind of how I think about these things.
And can you give a brief definition of happiness?
Brief definition of happiness. So the thing that I'm talking about is kind of the thing we touched on before, where it's reaching that like threshold point of awakeness where you can kind of have like peace or joy like on tap.
Okay, so that actually brings up, I want to ask, you're very clear in the document. Look, there is no final state. Things are impermanent. There's
Yeah.
no like we're going in the direction of competing as societies and cultures, but like there isn't this resting point. And just to help me understand, if we counterfactually assume there were a resting state in the direction you're trying to go towards with these three variables, what would that look like? Like you kind of do paint a bit of a picture of that, but I want to hear it in your own words at this time. Like, what does that direction look like?
So the resting state would be something like in the United States of America, like in public school, all children are taught like meditation pedagogy is so good that like to graduate high school, you are like stream entered and you can hit like jhanas 1 through 6.
Wow.
So that's just like a baseline assumption of like you're entitled to that in society. It's like you are entitled to an education that's that good. And if people are like not hitting their benchmarks or whatever, like we see that as like a problem where like all citizens deserve like it's like something like literacy. Where, like this is a fundamental right and it's kind of like our job to like teach this to you. And similar to public school, it's like not everybody wants to go to public school. Like if parents don't want their kids to do this or something, they could just opt out. You can homeschool. Like if you for some reason didn't want your kid to read or something, you could take them out. But it's a hard life if you don't know how to read. You know, it's like a much worse life. And there
Hmm.
might be like government squabbles over like, oh, like maybe we shouldn't let people homeschool if they're not going to teach their kids to fucking read. You know, there's all kinds of things like that might happen. There might be like cascading effects, but it would just be like baseline, like this thing is kind of a given. And so this exists. And you can assume that like you can imagine that it would have like huge society enhancing benefits. Like a lot of shit would just get way simpler. And that would help with wealth, it would help with coordination. You can assume it would be a pretty nice culture to live in. Like it would be pretty safe. People are gonna be really nice to each other. It's chill, whatnot. And you can imagine that you're like living in another country in the world and you like hear about this place and you're like, in this place, like people are wealthier, like people are not suffering from disease and hunger and like the strain of life as much as they are here. And apparently people are really kind to each other. And there's like no crime. And like people don't get mad at you in traffic. And all this shit sounds really cool. And you might want to move there. Or you might like start listening to music and like reading their stuff and being like, how can I get more like them? And one way or another, you might find yourself transform like becoming a member of that group, either by like moving there or by becoming that outside. And that would count as like a reproductive win for the US because they made another one somewhere else. Or you might, for whatever reason, like in your culture is still more appealing to you. And when you have your children, you raise them in that culture, and in that case, it's that culture's win. Yeah. Is that illustrative?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Um,
Oh, and steady state would be like if it's just so overwhelmingly awesome, like something like speaking the English language, you
yeah,
know, where it's just
it's a
so
lingua franca.
it's a lingua franca, so it's really hard to fight the to not learn English. And then once you learn English, it's even harder to fight American cultural creep because then you're exposed to like all English language media ever.
Hmm.
So it's something like that. But you can imagine something like learning the bundle of like meditation practice stuff being something like a lingua, being like a relational lingua franca,
Hmm.
where once you're there's a lot of pressure to be in, and once you're in, you're kind of like, well, might as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about what Satchitananda is, or SCA?
It's like the actual word, it's a Hindu thing. It's about like bliss, peace, light, joy. Um, in Buddhism, this would have been one of the states that the Buddha reached and then was like, actually, fuck it, this isn't permanent, therefore it's not good enough.
Hmm.
But I feel like it's a little too ambitious to be like everybody must attain full everybody must attain
Ah.
full and incessant enlightenment. And I kind of don't think it's necessary. What I'm talking about more is this like yeah, this like kind of bliss state. And I kind of see it as you're a meditator and stuff, so you kind of get this, I hope, where at one point in the meditation journey, your dream, you're like just you just want to feel good and you just want to feel okay. And you're like, I just want to feel okay. You might just be like, I want to feel okay forever or something. I just want to be in bliss forever. And then you learn to meditate enough to like access bliss. And then accessing it gets easier and easier. And then you're like, oh, like I actually don't want to be in bliss forever. But that's kind of a luxury you can only have once you have bliss on tap. It's like once you know you can just like hit the button and have it, you don't actually want to walk around in it 24/7 because you still want to receive like environmental feedback, like feedback from your environment and like know stuff. Um, but it feels really different to be on one side of that threshold than it does to be on the other. So what I'm interested in is not people walking around in like a permanent bliss state, but people having kind of like permanent access to that if and when they would want it.
Hmm.
And I think it feels really different to be in one of those positions than to be in the other. Even if realistically you're feeling basically the same spectrum of human emotion and spending about the same amount of time in every valent state, it's really different when it's a choice.
So you are talking about creating a culture or steering towards cultures where um, more and more people are able to access a specific bliss state.
Yeah.
Mhm. And it's not a insight attainment. It's a sort of absorption attainment.
Yeah, it's an absorption attainment, I would
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How would that culture view insight practice?
I think insight, there has to be like a little bit of insight attainment as well, so
Hmm.
that people know that I guess it's different from like doing a drug or something where you know
Hmm.
you're just like oh like universal basic cocaine or something. If you're just like oh universal
That sounds better. I think
like
we should do that, Shanthi.
universal basic heroin or something, then people would kind of, in addition to it being heroin and bad for you could have people being like, oh, actually, it's not that great. Like people who do heroin are lazy, like status associations with people who are doing heroin, like all this stuff, like status associations with people doing their Sachinanda and people being like, oh, it's lame. Only dorks do that. Like people should be like, if you're a real cool person, you would be like having sex, like all this. Like I can imagine all kinds of things like that coming out from it. And if there's like enough insight practice to understand what the Satchitananda is and be like, hey, like this is emptiness, this is touching the face of God, this is like really pure, this is really beautiful, this is something to be valued and like cherished and like not mocked, then I think like this is our birthright, this is our like universal thing, this is like sitting in the sunshine, this is like, that would help there be like cultural protections around it that I can see otherwise being not there.
Hmm. You describe it as mimetically transmissible. What does it mean that this particular state or Dharma is mimetically transmissible generally? Like, what are the implications of viewing the Dharma mimetically?
Um, Positive, I think, because it means like
Uh-huh.
it's not like the only way to transmit it is like mystical or like you have to like go to some sort of like crazy fountain or like somebody just put their hands on your head. It's like, oh, you can teach people you can have the instructions exist, and then you can have like cultural, mimetically transmitted cultural pressure towards getting curious about or following the instructions, and then people can do them, and then people can learn the skill. I think it's pretty exciting.
I agree that it's exciting and it's making me reframe a lot of my own work or my life. And but I also noticed this, it's not quite like a discomfort or an ick or something, but it's like more of a confusion of like or a resistance. It's like why haven't other people talked about the Dharma as mimetically transmissible? Like, are there any downsides to viewing it as mimetically transmissible? I mean, I guess it just kind of factually is, but also no one talks about it that way. Why don't more people talk about that? Like Chesterton's non-mimetically transmissible Dharma, offense, Like why is this the first time I'm hearing it in that terms,
I'm not the first person to talk about this.
No, but it's the first time I'm hearing about it in these terms.
That's weird, especially considering where you hang out.
I guess. I don't know. My Dharma exposure has been very different than yours, I would presume.
I mean, I feel like it's weird. Like, I feel like in places where you hang out are like the places where people are more likely to talk about this than anywhere else.
Maybe. I mean, Soryu, my teacher, talked a lot about feedback loops, which of course is connected to some of these kinds of ideas. But and I must have heard him talk about memes at some point, but that wasn't like this is at the core of your thinking is like let's make better cultures and look at the memes that are in those cultures and that sort of thing. And anyway,
And I think like well, people talk about memetics a lot in terms of religion. I feel like it's one of the
hmm,
major cases where people talk about memetics.
hmm,
And the Dharma historically has been transmitted through something that's kind of pseudo religious like, you know? Buddhism is kind of religion like. I don't know if it's really religion.
sure. I mean, it depends on what you define things as, but I know it's just maybe this is more an observation than a question. It's just striking, and I know in any case, a lot of this is occasioning me to be like, wow, I need to learn a lot more about evolution and memetics and also the Dharma. It's very
Yeah.
good. It's a good prod. Um, I'll also say as an aside that it's making me realize that in some ways, I'm thinking about the love department in particular of the Service Guild, and I'm like trying to do a better job at transmitting loving kindness practice than was received than I received. And it's like I think we can do much better at that. So that's like reframing that whole department for me. I'm like, oh, that's kind of what I'm already doing, but I hadn't thought about it in these terms explicitly before. Um,
I think that what you're doing, Tasshin, like you're doing kind of like a bit of old school transmission, which is like you just are like cool and people like you, and then people are like, "What's this guy on?" And then you have like you have like this is I'm Tashin and this is what I'm on like website, and then people can like click around and get curious. Um, but I also think there's some stuff at play in terms of like I don't know, just like how you speak and like the kind of accessibility and like Western accessibility in particular of your meta instruction that makes it easier for people to access through you. Like a good question is just like meta. It's hard for people to like. I don't know. A lot of people. It's hard to exist in the West without like exposure to like the concept of meta if you're in certain circles. And then the question, I guess we can like the memetics question is like why, if people are exposed to it, like the idea of it, does it not catch on
mhm.
instantly and like translate into practice or translate into curiosity about practice? At that point, I feel like it's a PR problem or something. Because I feel like if you accurately represent meta and you have like good enough memetics around it, it's like, of course, people want to do it like instantly.
Hmm.
The same way that the jhanas, I feel like the jhanas finally got like a good memetics boost, and now people are really into them.
Totally,
People
totally.
know what they are. That happened in like the last like 2 years. Is that like everybody knows what the jhanas are, and people are really investing in learning them.
Hmm. Hmm. That actually makes me want to ask about a phrase that you used where I feel like you deviate very briefly from the no pathos agenda to use a very beautiful, to me at least, phrase, namely cooperation, competition, empiricism dance.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah.
she covers her face, sort of
Yeah.
blushing.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me what that phrase means and why adding empiricism is important and what that gets you.
Um, so cultures and people can live in consensus realities where basically people just decide what's true and what they're going to behave on by like asking the people around them, and nobody really stops to look at base reality like at all. And our ability to as humans to do this is so strong, like our ability to create stories and communicate is so strong that within a few generations of doing this, you can basically live completely divorced from reality. You can just operate completely in your consensus bubble, especially if your environment doesn't change that much. So you don't really need to update the consensus that much. You can just totally live in myth, like a myth superimposed on reality. And if you have competition between two of these like myth systems, like it's often bloody or it's just about how appealing like living in one myth is over the other. But the thing that can really is like the great equalizer, I feel, is like something empirical where you're just like, okay, let's have a contest and let's like see what the outcome is. And then you can like actually learn something versus just kind of yanking at each other's consensus bubbles. So the kind of call to empiricism is a chance for this sort of less violent and less like, I don't know, leads to foolishness way of doing things. Um yeah, and it comes kind of cooperative at that level. You can think about like people diverging in their cultures, but still both being fundamentally scientific cultures, meaning that when there's a conflict, the idea is like, okay, I have my hypothesis, you have your hypothesis, let's run a test. And then there's data, and then you can update. And it's competitive in that it's like both of us competing to see like who was right or who was dominant, but it's cooperative in that you're both creating data together and you're both sharing that data. And what happens next is like kind of up to you. Like if I have proof that like my civilization is right about something, like if I'm like, hey, like we tried hand washing versus non-hand washing, and hand washing means people get way less cholera. And like, look at all these people who haven't died of cholera. Then you can choose to stay competitive by just being like, fuck it, whatever. We're still gonna like, there may be costs. We're still gonna index on our like not on our religion, which like forbids hand washing. We're still gonna keep doing it because we believe it has like other benefits. And maybe it does. It's like maybe we do hand washing, but in my culture we also do birth control, so nobody has any fucking kids. And you guys don't do hand washing, but you have enough kids that it's like fine, and then you still come out ahead. Like that could be a real thing. Or you can adjust and be like, oh shit, like there actually does seem to be this implication for this thing, and we are going to take this like unique aspect, like hand washing, and incorporate it into our culture. In which case, the competition becomes cooperative through like the empirical thing, and then you like absorb it, and you become a little bit more like the other guy. But then you get like major boost, and if you can still manage to keep your religion intact while integrating this thing, then your religion gets like 10x because nobody's collar anymore. You know, like lots of things like that can happen. So I think as long as there's like this knowledge sharing, things can really be, yeah, like the boundary between what is competitive and what is cooperative can really decrease.
Hmm.
It's like,
Totally. Hmm.
I find that I don't know, I find it kind of beautiful. I think what's sad is when people don't know what they're doing and therefore like they can't decouple stuff and they can't share things with other people. Like I think this happened often in like the early history of Christianity or something. It's like people would come across like a civilization that where people were doing some really fucked up stuff, like I don't know, killing babies or like abusing women or whatever, and they would just be like, "Fuck, like we're Christians and we don't do this shit, and these people aren't Christians and they do, and therefore like the only way we can like get them to stop like killing albino children or whatever is if we Christianize them." And these people would be like really fucking hard to Christianize. They would really put up a fight, and the Christian people could be like, "Oh, this is so tragic. I really like, you know, we're really having to like stomp these people, but we can't allow them to continue living like this." And if there could be like more decoupling, there could be ways to like raise the bar on like the thing you find really intolerable about another civilization while still allowing them to be mostly themselves if they can decouple enough to like take in slight modifications.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to be like the same overwhelming level of violence.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Uh, I want to ask one more question, and then we can see where we want to go from there. Um, you allude at some point to how to create these cultures and talk about different directions it could go in. And you talk about the difference between selection pressure and incentives and how selection pressure is much better. And I guess I'm wondering, like, practically, pragmatically, how one starts to think structurally about designing systems or cultures like this. Like, what does that actually look like? How how do you think about these things? And to own where I'm coming from, it's like, well, if this kind of thing is true, then I should be thinking about, for example, the service guild in terms of in these terms and uh, like
Hmm.
that. I would like to do a good job at creating that. And so, how do I get better at that practically? Or, someone else who's in a different situation wants to think th in these terms. Like, how do they actually do that?
Yeah. Poof. So this is a little tricky. An incentive. So when you're doing something like an incentive, something slightly like more short term, where you're imagining like retaining a person by basically like rewarding a behavior so they're more likely to do it again, assuming that they like seek rewards. So that's one way of like getting on the same page as their like animal body. Another way is if you wanted to something thinking more about like selection pressure is something more like investing in the health or fitness of people who are members of your guild so that you can basically stop them from like dying or and encourage them to reproduce and on a shorter time frame stop them from the case where they notice this is bad for their health and then they leave for something healthier. So something like an incentive is kind of the short frame version of it. Like you can think about like rewarding money as an incentive is just like it stops people from doing something that would be because money is so fungible. You could just in theory you could invest 100% of it in your health. And if you're doing that, then like anything that gives you less money is like less healthy and you could go migrate towards it. Um, yeah, that's one way to think about it. The
Hmm,
incentives are just the shorter term version of
I see.
this. And the more like fungible or flexible you make your incentives, the more true this is. If your incentives are like more concrete, then like the one to one of incentive to selection pressure is not necessarily true.
Hmm. There's two things on my mind about the guild that I'm like, well, on the one hand, that feel related to this. One is, I don't, at least at this time, I could see changing my mind about this, but at this time, I don't really care if the service guild exists past my life. I think I just want it to do a really good job while I'm alive, and then like let the people who are alive after me make a decision about what to do from there. Like I can't anticipate what will be good then. I think a lot of organizations are interested in like perpetuity, and I'm not interested in perpetuity necessarily. Um, and similarly, I'm thinking about my like at least stated preference of not having kids, and I felt like this reading this document was very validating of that, in that it was like, hey, you can actually be like effectively mimetically very proliferate even if you don't have kids. And like I think my goal is steering towards being like incredibly mimetically proliferate and like spreading ideas that I think are wholesome and beneficial and good and practices that I think are wholesome and beneficial and good. And that like if I live a life that successfully distributes those like to the whole human culture at like scale, then that's like arguably as or even more important than like physically biologically reproducing.
Fuck yeah. And it translates into it can feed back into biological reproduction for the people that you care about or identify with. As
Right, right. Yeah, obviously it's interesting what you said about like making sure that the guild members can reproduce. I'm like, oh, interesting,
long as
notable.
you're not imposing co like costs. I think that's
Hmm.
also good because I think just by having the guild members interact with people, that's probably net positive for people's
Hmm.
odds of meeting people they're gonna have family
Totally.
or something. But if you realize that you were doing something like I also this isn't how the service guild works, but just an idea is like if you were had a church or whatever, and like part of your church practice was like you sent people on like single sex missions from ages 20 to 30, that would be like a really dumb thing to do. That would just be like a really bad that would be like a really bad idea. Or if you expected all people to like work for no money for
Hmm.
like during their like reproductive and childbearing prime, that would just impose like massive reproductive costs
Hmm.
on people just because it's like not, yeah.
I'm really grateful to be starting to encounter these frames and think in these ways. I feel like you're, especially, I think, well, both because of the way you frame it, but also that you connect it to spiritual practice and kind of see how they would be related and how something I've cared about extensively is like connected to evolution and these kinds of thinking. So it makes me want to think in those terms more. Um, in any case, you have answered a lot of my questions and shared your story very fully. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or dive more deeply into?
Oh, I'm like, how that's a lot of talking I just did.
Uh-huh.
Um, my head's spinning a little bit.
Hmm.
I'm really glad for the questions that you ask about like incentives versus selection pressures and things. I think part of this is also that people don't always it would help a lot if people were conscious of this kind of thing because it's a bit of a battle if you're trying to look out for the reproductive well-being. If you're trying to look out for the fitness, like holistic fitness, including like reproductive capacity of another person, and they don't realize that you're doing that, because then they're more likely to follow shorter term incentives
Hmm.
that are not as aligned because they will not realize the importance or value of thinking of themselves in that way and holding like their concept of health in that way. You know, I see this all the time in terms of like people choosing jobs that impose massive fitness costs but like offer a lot of money, and instead of jobs where they're like fulfilled in meeting people and like know who they are and are like working towards more likely to start a family, that kind of thing, but have less money. And they'll be like, oh, but if I have the job that is more money, I'm more likely to get what I want in life. And it's like not really. Like they don't care about that. And so like the burden of you like getting the thing that you the burden of you transforming this incentive into something that's actually healthy is totally on you. And in fact, the same organization that gives you the incentive is going to be getting in the way of you using the incentive
Hmm.
toward your health.
Hmm.
It's not going to be as smooth of a translation as you think it is,
Hmm.
versus an organization where they don't give you as much, but they're really interested in facilitating or at least getting out of the way for you using it however you want toward your well-being. It's like there's a really like the actual usable wealth that you get is totally different.
Hmm.
It's very frustrating to see people sometimes, I feel like, just maxing for like wealth and not thinking about like actual usable wealth, and that there are like critical periods at which resources are valuable to you.
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
know. Drives me a little.
The game she enjoys most is still resource management.
Oh. At its core,
Yeah.
at its, at its core, I like to play the resource management game. And you know
Are
what's
there,
resource management? Evolution is really good at resource management.
huh. Yeah, there were whole, let the record show there were whole tangents of resource management that would have been very interesting to go down. But
Yeah,
I think your ideas about land and property are incredibly interesting. So I
thank
hope that we have another conversation at some point about that. But
you.
um,
Resource
yeah.
management edition. Yeah, it's nice to sometimes see like how a lot of like personal development or whatever is just coming back to like who you were when you were like 6.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah.
So true, bestie. Uh, Uh, well, thank you so much for being so generous with sharing yourself, both your story and your ideas. And I've been really touched by this conversation and by your character and who you are generally. You've been a big influence on me, and I'm grateful to have spent so much time learning about you and how you see the world. So thank you.
You're a big influence too, Tasha, and you know that.
Mhm.
I'll say to the listeners, the single greatest impact Tashin has had on my life has been generally updating my model of the kinds of lives people can live wholesomely and in service massively. Because I was like, first of all, you taught me that one can do it how Tashin does it. And second of all, you taught me that, oh, if you did that just by kind of making it up, frankly, and being really good. And like, you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to be really good at it. And it worked. I was like, oh shit, one can simply be really good at the thing that they do.
What were you thinking before?
I had like a really limited understanding. I was like, oh, you can be like I was like, you can be a nun, you can be like one of these weird like pay per Zoom call Dharma teachers that I think are sus and I hate. You can like be like a lay person who meditates, I guess, and then like do a lot of church stuff when you're old. It was very limited. Basically, it was extremely limited.
Uh-huh. Huh.
Yeah, I had a very limited sense of what one could do.
I think Peace Pilgrim did that for me, and certainly Soryu and some other people, but especially Peace Pilgrim, because in a way she kind of like LARPed being who she was, uh, and I was very inspired by her example. And it's like, oh, I'd like to. And she was really clear, like, hey, the goal isn't for you to do what I did. Like, only I should do what I did. You should do what you need to do. Um, Even though I've taken elements of inspiration from what she's done, it's just like, oh, I could be whoever it is that Tashin wants to be and be that fully. So anyway, I'm glad that you received that. It's so interesting because if this isn't obvious to the listener, you're going to turn 24 this month, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, you've already lived a very whole life at 24, and I look forward to the next 24. See where those go. Inshallah, may you live a long and blessed life that is of great benefit to all those who encounter you, you know? But okay, well, thank you so much, Shanti. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Tashin.